tell me if that worked or not for
Right,
doing
right,
locally.
right, right, right.
The
So there's going to come a point when we admit all, and we won't be able to have the chatter going back and forth between us, particularly if it's going out on a live stream.
Right.
yeah, that might actually you may as well think that's happening right now, Peter.
7:47, 10 minutes. I don't think that we should make the announcement about the questions and everything until 8 o'clock precisely, so that any late joiners hear it.
Okay, so yeah, the stream's running. So I mean, anything you're saying now, if people are going to be able to go back on the YouTubes and watch it if we publish that link.
Ah bon? Okay.
So just no.
Okay. No, this is for posterity, is it? All right.
Okay, so Patrick, your meeting, you have control.
Okay, thank you.
And it should be working. Let's see here. Well, I'll figure out. See, I hate this mobile phone stuff, and I'll try to figure it out for you, Peter. I'll try to get you a mobile link.
Now it's still a not listed video, correct? That's the way you're.
Well, no, I actually set that one public. If that was our intention here, I can change that.
No.
That can be
That's
toggled.
fine. I was just asking to confirm. So.
Yeah, this one is listed right now.
I do see a live video. It says CARA Technical Conference 2020 right now. It looks like it's doing, and it's black right now. So.
Well, that's interesting. I wonder why that would be.
Well,
no, keep watching it.
Because we haven't actually. Well, no, I was going to say because I haven't had admitted anybody, but that's different.
That's actually running. So maybe hit play on it if it hasn't.
Well, I'm just looking at a thumbnail. Just let's see here. Oh yeah. Ooh, my ugly picture there. Son of a gun.
Well, it's following the noise source right now.
Yeah. Well, because we haven't actually. Well, no, I was going to say because I haven't.
It's actually running. So maybe hit play on it if it hasn't.
Yeah. Well, it's playing. It's going great. It's showing the screens when it switches back and forth between us. So.
Only it's delayed, so it's going to be to our benefit to probably ignore it for the most part.
Oh, sorry. I was telling you that I had 3 people in the waiting room. I actually have 12 people in the waiting room.
Oh yeah, they're going to start showing up en masse here.
Yeah. I'm going to admit my second account here just so that I can see what I'm. There we go. Connecting.
Dana, I haven't seen anything come in yet on the link.
I know, Peter. It's because telephones are my bane, and I hate them, and I have to manually type.
That's all right. Then send me an email. I just thought that's the telephone's the easiest way. But anyway, go ahead with the email, and I'll just.
Easiest is a relative term. Easiest for you, perhaps. Okay, I got. Of course, also the way that I'm working, and this is my fault, is email's also difficult, but just.
I could send an email there. Dana,
I've got it.
You've got it. Okay.
Easier than the phone business.
Yeah. And then you've got the Google Doc up. Do you, Peter?
Well, I can't have that much on my screen because I got to have the presentation. But yes, I do. Yeah. Oh, you've cleaned it out. I see. Oh yeah. By the way, you saw the email from John. He didn't have the link for the conference. And I presume that you saw that and sent it to him.
Yes, I have. That's right.
Okay.
Because you have an email coming to you, Peter.
Okay. On my Gmail account?
Both, I think a Hotmail and your Gmail.
Okay.
So just from the recording perspective and so on, should we then now open the conference, and Dana, you could sort of entertain people for 10 minutes until Barry starts?
But that's up to us. So what do we got for time? We got 10 minutes. Give it a couple more minutes.
Yeah, maybe start 5 minutes before.
Okay, so another 5 minutes from now.
The
Yeah.
Now here I'm gonna hit him what I think is going to mute me and tell me if it does.
Yeah, it
And-
muted you. There's the picture.
Yeah, nothing there. Okay. The
I switched over to my laptop and I'm going to kill the camera. I have killed the camera on my CARA screen there.
Yeah, and actually, if we kill the camera feeds on ones that aren't doing something, that's good, because if we saw in the stream there, that sort of it had that grid view when we were talking yesterday, and so it would, if you turn the camera off, it wouldn't try to put that video into the picture anywhere.
Right. Okay.
So we had a couple of anonymous animals in the Google Docs there. We got a bat and an armadillo and a coyote. I hope none of them are rabid.
So what it means is that we're going to have to identify ourselves each over, because who the hell knows who the bat is?
Yeah. What we could do is maybe discuss that on the Google Doc right now. Let's see.
Of course, it doesn't tell you who you are yourself, which is funny, but.
Oh, I don't know how to spell anonymous.
Peter said it didn't tell him that he was the coyote though. So so Vince is the bat. So
So I typed just now.
Okay,
you're identified by name.
I've got the tweet queued up, but I'm not going to tweet that until after we do our admit all. Okay,
All right.
just to keep things in sequence, right?
Otherwise, people are watching us, right?
Well, 20
Well,
seconds ago anyway. Yeah.
Well, people are, but nobody knows the link. The minute I publish this, everybody's got the link, right?
And they've got rewind back to when we turned stream on. Yeah.
Oh, for God's sake, is that right? Okay.
So that's what I told you. Yeah, you will consider it's there. And that's the thing about the live stream with if you allow the rewind thing, that is the case for that.
Okay.
Like I said, it's we're YouTube streamers now, so yeah, maybe it's fate worse than COVID. We'll find out. That's kind of weird as I see participants kind of flip in and out. I saw Ken Reed pop up and go out. And so is that how Zoom's handling its waiting room thing? Is it lets you in and then it kicks you off to the waiting room?
Sorry, say that again.
That's a CTV identifying in the background, Peter, if you're listening to CW.
So I've just admitted Vince as well here.
There we go.
I've just admitted Vince. Good man, Vince.
Every once in a while I've been known. Morning, gents.
Morning. I just noticed when I'm looking at the number of people in the waiting room, it only gives me like a little 3-line view. I have to scroll it. So it's going to be tough for me to see when John joins. Well, no, it won't be once I get everybody in, right? But
Can one of you guys post the live stream in the chat document? I'll get that out on social media, please.
we've taken care of that already.
Peter's.
Well, no, but Vince can do it on his as well.
Exactly.
Oh, I see.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I haven't tweeted it yet, Vince, until we admit everyone on the Zoom meeting, and then I'm going to tweet
Then we'll hit the button.
link.
Oh, we're at 5
that's
Peter. Maybe it's a good time to do that.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do then is I'll turn off the mic for everybody except Peter. And do you want me to turn the video off for Vince as well, or should I leave that on, or what do you think?
Well, leave them off until we got something to say. And I think individuals, I think you can toggle your own video off and on, but
Yeah, I can.
I won't be able to. Or
Right.
There's my video off.
Okay, so I'm going to, first of all, right now, I'll spotlight Peter. And so your screen, Peter, is now locked to be the presentation screen. So you're essentially live as far as the streaming goes and us preparing here. And
Okay.
then Dana, I guess, do I leave your video on for you to do a preamble, or do you want to just have voice?
Yes.
Well, I
Yes.
should be able to. I should be able to toggle that
Yeah.
myself, and I don't know what'll happen if you toggle it.
Okay.
But yeah, you'll want to. You're going to want to sort of maybe do the mute all and then unmute, include me in that one, and I'll kill my own local mic. So the
Yeah. So your
Yeah,
mic just
I
died
have full
there.
local control of my
Okay.
audio too, right?
Okay, so it's 3 minutes to right now. So I think, Vince, if you wanted to go quiet there and turn off your stuff, I think that's fine. And then we'll be watching the. Oh, have you received the email? Have the live streaming link or not? You still need that?
Yeah, I've got the live streaming link. I have everything I need, so I'm going silent now.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Perfect.
Just
Send the
about to
doc.
go. I think we can admit all the people then.
Okay, so Dana, you want to stay with your video, or do you want to?
Well, if well, it's whoever's doing whatever kind of introduction.
Yeah. Well, I've highlighted Peter's screen, so he's basically front and center.
Okay. I can do the introduction then. Fine. Allons-y.
Okay, so I will do the admit all here. And first I'm going to mute my own mic, just in case.
Break a leg, gents.
It's cheaper than breaking an antenna.
What we don't know is how long it takes for 85 users to come online.
Yeah, they're coming online now, Peter, so you're
Yeah.
live.
Good morning, folks in Calgary and beyond. This is the, I think it's about the 10th annual CARA Technical Conference. Usually we hold these conferences in association with our spring flea market, which was scheduled for today, but we all know why that isn't happening. So this is our first attempt at a teleconference using Zoom meeting. And so the people are joining us through Zoom meeting, and also we are streaming this, and you can get the link to the live stream, although if you're here in the conference, you don't need it. And if you're hearing me, you're already there. But we put it out on Twitter, both on the CARA account, and also Vince Dion has put it on his Twitter account, the link to the online live stream. So for those of you who are joining us here in the Zoom meeting, we got a couple of housekeeping items to tell you about. The host has muted all microphones, and we're asking you to all turn off your videos as well, just to keep the bandwidth down so that we don't have too much latency. We're going to have 3 presentations, one at 8 a.m. and I'm about to start with a presentation on APRS. At 9 a.m., Vince, VE6LK, is going to give us a presentation on network analyzers. And then at 10 o'clock, we have a presentation from John in Georgia, who is a well-experienced D-Star user on D-Star basics. Throughout these, then, the structure is going to be about a 45-minute presentation, followed by about 5 minutes of question and answer, and then a 10-minute break until the next presentation starts. Now you might ask, how do I ask a question if my mic is muted? This is how you do it. Look around on your Zoom console or your Zoom controls, and you will see something called chat. And what you should do if you have a question is send a chat message to everyone, and Dana VA6DJH is going to monitor the chat, and then he will forward the questions to the presenter at the end of the presentation. So without any further ado, let's see if I can share my screen, and we will start on the first presentation. So welcome everyone. Just bear with me for a moment, please. Even though we checked this ahead of time, it does take time to click the various buttons and make things happen. I wish I hadn't clicked that last button. I think I inadvertently, no, I didn't. Let's see. Okay, we're going to share the screen. Okay, Dana, can you let me know, is that showing properly on the shared screen?
That's looking good on the Zoom meeting. Yep.
Okay, very good. So now I got to get my, unfortunately, you may find me looking off to the side of the camera because my version of this is for some reason not coming up on my second monitor, which has the camera on it. So we'll make a few adjustments here and keep on trucking. So good morning all. So welcome to the CARA Technical Conference, the APR, and my presentation this morning. I am Peter Barry, Victor Alpha 6, Papa Juliet Bravo, and I'm speaking to you from Calgary, from my home in Valley Ridge in Calgary. And welcome to the 85 members of the that have joined us on the Zoom meeting, and the unknown number who may be following this live stream on YouTube. So my presentation this morning is on APRS basics and messaging, and let's talk about what why don't we see this advancing? What is happening here? This worked perfectly during the rehearsal. There we go. What are the topics of discussion this morning? And the basic idea here is that we're going to talk about APRS on two different levels. One of them is a basic level for people who haven't seen it before, but I hope that's also going to give some new information perhaps for more experienced operators. You never know what you might pick up. And then following that first part, which will take about 20 minutes, then we're going into a more advanced, a little bit more advanced discussion on messaging, which I think is one of the most interesting and useful features of APRS. So the first part of it is going to be a discussion about what is APRS. It is talking about basic packet radio and TNCs. What is the equipment and software that you need to run APRS? I'm going to talk a little bit about what is a digipeater and a NIGATE, and what are some of the software things that you can use to access the data that's in the APRS network, principally APRS.FI. The second part of the presentation is going to be more detailed, and it will be about messaging. And we're going to talk about three different kinds of messaging: radio to radio messaging, radio to SMS texts, and radio to email. Now this is all presupposing that we're not going to use the internet unless noted otherwise. So this is a system that works when the internet is not present. So when you're out in the hinterland away from a cell phone signal, or when the internet is down under emergency conditions. Okay, so what is APRS? It's the Automated Packet Reporting System. It's a digital real-time communication system that will share tactical information, telemetry, and messages. It was invented by Bob Bruniga, WB4APR, and that's him on the right there in this photo. And he is a professor and a researcher at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. And he started this in the mid-1980s. It developed through the 90s, and it has remained almost essentially unchanged since about 2000. So for more than 20 years. In fact, in 2001, 19 years ago, they wrote down the APRS specification, which you can get as a document online. And I think it hasn't been revised since. There's been a little bit of supplementary changes, but not much. So basically, it's remained the same. It's built on packet radio. Those of us who have been licensed long enough remember packet radio. It's not used much anymore. It's based on a digital protocol called the AX.25 packet protocol. It's an ad hoc network, station to station, and it uses digipeating. And it needs something called a terminal network controller, okay, a TNC. So you hear talk about TNC. There's got to be a TNC present in the system somewhere to translate your voice audio into digital packets and then send out those packets over the airwaves to a receiver. Okay, and what it is, it shares real-time tactical information. So everybody's on 144.39 simplex in North America. It's a different number in frequency in Europe and in Australia. But here in North America, we use 144.39. It's simplex. So it's simplex. And the system announces your presence. It says, hey, I'm on the air, and this is where I am. You know the phenomenon. You go on the radio here in Calgary, there's got to be 20 or more different repeaters, and you never know. You know by habit which people are probably on which repeater, but you don't know that for sure on any given day that anybody's around, so you put out a call. Well, the point is that with the APRS system, when you go on, you can tell everyone, hey, here I am. I happen to be on the air just now, and I'm listening to repeater XYZ. Okay. And for the repeaters, a packet of information can be put out that for all users that will tell you what are the repeaters in the area, what's their frequency, what's their offset, the tone, so you can use them. You can also put up information about locations, events. You can say what the location, what's the information about the event. It can contain, excuse me, information about weather or other telemetry. So the station IDs that are associated with APRS are in the format of a call sign and a suffix. Okay, the suffix is called the SSID, your System Information Designator, SSID. That's the -9 that's on the end of there. There is an intelligence in that suffix, and not everyone uses it, and it's not mandatory, but it is recommended by Bob Bruniga and is in fact available. The various recommendations are available on the APRS I think it's .org, but whatever, the official APRS website. Some of the ones that are designated is that we'd like to standardize on, and it helps for other people. Use -7 if you're on a walkie-talkie or an HT. Use -9. If your primary mobile in your vehicle should be on -9. So that tells people this is my primary mobile, and usually that primary mobile is message capable. -10 for internet, -12 for other uses. There's a whole list of them, right? The system makes use of something called a digipeater. So what is a digipeater? It's a digital repeater. It's just a combination of the two words. And what it does is a digipeater will receive a beacon that's been sent out by an APRS radio and retransmits it. So it's just it just takes it in, puts it out, and it's got a system within its software to avoid clashes. Okay. What is an iGate? An iGate is an APRS station, usually also a digipeater, with an internet connection. And what it does is it sends out, it receives beacons and then transmits them on into the IS, the internet system. So iGates can be either one way or two way, and I don't see a lot of point in having a one-way iGate. Some people have put them up, but the terrible thing about that is that it stifles outgoing messages back to the radio from the IS system. I'm just going to take a little quick pause here to make sure that everything is still going okay. Dana, are you are we still going okay out to the users?
Yeah, we're out to the world, and I see a couple people in the chat.
Okay, good. All right, we're carrying on. So if an iGate is, we were talking about iGates, and if an iGate is two-way, then it receives messages routed to APRS stations from the internet and transmits them back out on RF. So the idea is that your radio blasts out a little packet called a beacon, and it goes boing, boing, and it hits another station, and when that's an iGate, and then it gets captured, sent into the internet. And then if somebody wants to send a message to you from the internet, then it goes into the system, and the iGate says, "Hey, I remember Peter was. I heard Peter 5 minutes ago. He's obviously within range of me." That's what the iGate is saying to itself in its little digital mind, and it sends out the message to Peter on radio. Examples of an iGate here in Calgary are the Calgary at the V6RYC on Nose Hill, and Pigeon is also an iGate on the Pigeon Mountain site, which is above Canmore. Okay, now the beacons that are sent out are highly structured, and they're defined by the APRS protocol. Now, each beacon contains the station ID of the sender and a definition of how many repeats that should get, because we don't want them bouncing around all over creation. Okay, usually it contains your position, the speed in your course if you're moving, and it can contain messages that include the voice frequency that you're listening to. They can have custom information. Have telemetry about the battery conditions at the site, or numerous other things. You can have weather station information. Now here at the bottom is an example of a raw packet, and it was sent out, and it has wide 1, wide 2 tells how many hops that it's going to have. So we'll more about that shortly. And you can see that it contains 146.85 megahertz T110 060. That's the offset. This is information that it can be automatically inserted into the beacon and tells others what your voice out if your radio is listening to. And you can put in your own custom comment. I put one in here that said scanning Calgary repeaters. Okay. A very important thing is that a beacon can be an emergency beacon. Inside the beacon packets is a definition of a thing called Mike E status. It's coded right in and with a very structured code. And other radios and software on the internet are watching and parsing that particular piece of code inside the packet. And one of the pieces of information, one of the settings for your Mike E can be emergency. On my particular radio, if it receives a beacon from another radio or from a digipeater that has that emergency Mike E set, it will pop up. This is what the pop-up screen would look like. It comes up in red on the radio, and it with an emergency, and it has a horn that goes 12 times. Beep, beep, beep. It really sets off a reaction. Use it with caution, but it's nice to know that that function exists A lot of people don't know how to use that function properly, the mic E function. So make it a point. If you've got an APRS radio, make it a point that you know how you can program that, and not just with the computer programming, but actually from your own faceplate. If you're ever in an emergency situation, you can set this. It will set off an alarm all over the place. Somebody will see that and transmit that information to the proper authorities that, hey, we've received an emergency notice. It's at this location. It's from this person in this call sign. Okay, very important function. Okay, beacon hops, transmission intervals. APRS is essentially local. It's local, real-time information. You don't need to know who's on the air in Edmonton or Montana if you're driving around in Calgary. So the number of repeats is defined in the packet. So stick with it. Most radios these days that have pre-programmed and software that's used to program trackers and things like that come preset with wide 1.1 and wide 2.1. And that tells it that basically it's going to take 2 hops before it just 2 digipeats. In Calgary and in the foothills and in the surrounding areas, 2 hops is plenty. That's all it takes to get into to an eye gate. There are enough eye gates around. You have to understand your local system. If you were really in a true wilderness situation, then you might go 2, 3. But for the love of God, don't put too many hops in, because what it does is clutter up the system with too many packets. The other thing is to have smart beaconing. A lot of the trackers and radios can do smart beaconing that's proportional to your speed that you're moving. A moving station every 2 minutes might be appropriate. A fixed station, 10 to 20 minutes. Bob Bruniga has recommended 20 minutes. He says that you should be able to, even if you're in a strange city, turn on your APRS radio for 20 minutes. In the course of 20 minutes, you should be able to find out everything there is to know about all the repeaters that are in the area, what frequencies they're on, and how many users are out and about in the area and what frequencies they are on. So about 20 minutes, you should be able to pick up everything you need to know. When the beacons come into a radio, the APRS equipped radio, and this happens to be a snapshot from my FTM 400. It's a Yaesu radio. It's one of the fancier new ones. We'll talk about equipment. Nice color touchscreen on it. And you can see it lists all the packets that it's received, all the beacons that it's received. You can click on any one of the beacons on the list and it will give you this kind of information. Speed, course, altitude, position comment, latitude. This one says that it's 0.3 kilometers to the west. That means that I traveled, I guess, 300 meters since that last beacon occurred. Because where I am now is 300, because I was looking at my own beacon. But it tells you, so what it does is tells you if you hear another station, oh, well, that guy is 50 kilometers east of me, right? And the little green dot will move around to indicate east, right? Okay. If you get through, and this goes through to the internet and through an iGate, then it will be picked up by various pieces of software on the internet system. And APRS.fi is one of my favorites. It's an internet site in Finland, of all places, that plots fixed and mobile beacons on Google Maps. Displays the station information, the telemetry, the raw packets, the messages. It's a pretty good site. This is a screenshot of a capture of what the kind of information that comes up. You can see that there are some, a mobile station will have a track behind it. The other fixed objects or stations are indicated. The WX, the blue WX dots are weather stations. The black diamonds are there are eye gates or digipeaters. They're eye gates. If you click on a station, it will give you more information. This is what comes up. You see the Mikey message that I talked about earlier. And this one, it says in service. That's the one that could say emergency. It gives you your location, last position, when it happened, blah, blah, blah. all of it's there. It's great stuff. Take a look. It tells you the stations that are near your current position, and it tells you stations which have heard that beacon, not that particular beacon, but heard that station directly on the radio and when they heard it. Okay, so that's the base. That's the system that that we have. So let's take a look a little bit farther on the equipment that you can use. I'm going to run through this fairly quickly, and I know this might be a little bit like trying to rush the information, but we have a limited length of time, and we do want to get to more detailed stuff about APRS messaging. So the kind of equipment you can have, you need to have a radio, you need to have a GPS, and you need to have a TNC. So sometimes they're all built into one unit. So that could be in a HT or a mobile. Sometimes the GPS is external and the TNC is external, and then they can connect that to the radio. And sometimes it's just a one-way tracker that it sends out your presence and position, but it can't receive or display messages. And sometimes it can be a mobile phone. That's a little bit of a cheat because there's no radio and we're hams, right? We want to use the radio. Okay, Kenwood were early implementers, and they're still very good implementers. Kenwood worked with Bob Bruninga and to implement it, and one of the nicest implementations is on the Kenwood D710. The advantage is that it has all the APRS functions built in, but it also has two-way communication to the laptop or a tablet. So it's two-way, and you can use the radio as a dumb TNC and let the laptop or tablet control everything, and they can send and receive messages, and you can type on your laptop, and you can have the map display on your laptop or tablet or even on a phone. But it has to be a wired connection. The disadvantage of the 710, it has no touchscreen message input on the radio, and it doesn't happen to have another digital mode, although that's irrelevant to APRS, but it doesn't have the other voice digital. This is the one that I talked about earlier. I use this one, the FTM 400. There's a shot of it. The advantage is that it's got a full APRS implementation. It has a touch screen for message text input, which will be important to us when we get to talking about messages. It also happens to have C4FM digital voice in the same radio. As I said, irrelevant to APRS, but nice to have. The disadvantage is that it has an output that's only one way. So you can, in fact, display your map data on a tablet or a laptop, but you can't set up on the tablet or laptop and use the radio just as a TNC and then send your data two ways from the tablet to the radio and the radio to the tablet. It only goes one way, and that's out to the tablet to display information, but you can't use it to input to the radio. Then there are the HTs. They're very popular. The advantage is that they're built in, they have the built-in GPS and the TNC, and they send and receive beacons and messages. The disadvantage is it's a small screen, there's no touch input, they're much more expensive than a regular HT, about double and more. And they have a rather complex menu system. So hams are notoriously cheap, but a lot of them are springing for these expensive HTs that do the complete package. By far, the cheapest solution to get into APRS is, well, I guess the cheapest is to do nothing but just use your cell phone. We'll get to that in a moment. But the second cheapest is to connect your cell phone to an HT or some other radio with a wire, and that's all you need, just the connection wire, nothing more. There are programs for Android called APRS Droid, and iOS there's one called Pocket Packet. There's others on iOS that don't work so well, and they send their messages when they want to transmit. The cell phone will generate a packet audio, and then the radio receives it just as an audio input, and you use voice operated transmit VOX to send it out. And similarly, the cell phone is listening to the audio coming from the radio, and it can decode packets coming in. The disadvantage of this system, although it is inexpensive, is that it's fussy to set up. it often only transmits or only receives, but not both. What happens is that especially the inexpensive Chinese radios, when they receive, if you have squelch on, the squelch doesn't open fast enough to get the packet header to get the packet to send to your cell phone. They're just too slow. They're not a high performance radio. So what you end up doing is that if you want to listen, then you got to open the squelch, and then the radio is continuously in receive mode, so that when you want to transmit a beacon, it won't transmit because it's using VOX, and the radio is always in receive. So then you say, well, I want to be able to transmit beacons. So then you put it on, you put the squelch, say, on 1 on a low setting, and then, yeah, it'll transmit just fine, but you'll never receive anything because like I said before, the squelch doesn't open fast enough. So it's fussy and it doesn't work hellish well, but it does work. And here's an example. One of our local hams, Amir, VA6 QAS, used this system to go all the way to BC. And you can see there's his track. It worked. So, you know, there's no denying it. It does work. Okay. Then you can, a second level is where there are these things are called micro trackers. You can get them from Bionics, one from Argent Data. The one on the right there, see the one that's got a USB and a little red case. That one we're going to talk a little bit about. The advantage of these are they're inexpensive. They're not too expensive. They pair with a GPS or a radio to transmit position package. And some of them, like the one on the right there, have onboard GPS. The disadvantages is that some of these tiny trackers have no receive or display. Tiny Tracker 4 does from Bionics, but it's already over $100, right? Okay, this one is the Argent Data T3 Micro, and that's the one with the red case removed. I think actually when you buy it, you might just get the bare bones board and you have to buy that little red case to put around it separately. But look at the size of it, and it has built-in GPS. Here on the left, you can, that is a 1/8-inch pin, 4-barrel pin to connect to your radio for the, and it put out the PT. It sends and receives the audio, and it has the PTT in the ground from the four parts of that. And it just plugs into, now the USB side of it can be plugged into just a battery, and then that's it. You pre-program the beacon comments that you want, and it will work just fine that way. And our friend Vince, VE6LK, who's up on the second presentation, built a number of trackers for use with the MS Bike Tour using this one. And in fact, these photos are courtesy of Vince. Another one that you can use is the MobileLink TNC3. It's full two-way TNC with a wire to the radio. You can see it there on the left, and then it has Bluetooth to an Android tablet. It works great. It uses any HT with the right connection cable. You can build your own cable, full APRS Droid functions, smart beacon mapping, message, open source, full software. So you can turn any, you don't have to buy the expensive integrated radio. You can buy a good quality HT, and then you can get one of these TNCs to pair with it. And then you've got all the functions of that $800 HT. Okay, well, maybe not quite all, but I might exaggerate slightly there, but he's got virtually the same. Okay. The disadvantages is one extra piece of external gear. Okay, there's also, you can cheat. You don't have to have a radio. You can use your iPhone or Android programs. The advantage is that you can beacon your presence without additional hardware. You can send and receive messages. Disadvantages, you need the cell phone connection. And it's no good for an emergency or when you're off the grid. Those are the basics. Sorry to rush them slightly, but we wanted to get to this part of it. APRS messaging. One of the most important things that you can do with an APRS radio is send and receive messages when you don't have a cell phone connection, or when the internet is, or when you're out of cell phone range. Okay, I was about to say when the internet is down, but that's not true. You need the internet for some of these, but for some of them you don't. For radio to radio, it's completely independent of the internet, and it's completely independent of cell phones. The radio to SMS and the radio to email do require an internet connection at some point. It's not like if the internet is down locally, you can use this to get out to an area where it is. You can where iGate is connected to the internet. Let's start with radio to radio messages. APRS has structured itself to use messages in a packet that contain up to 66 characters of text. And most input to the radios is done by the twist and push method or the DTMF pad on the microphone. Some of them have touchscreen keyboards. That's why I particularly like that TNC mobile link, because it links to the keyboard that you get the display, all the beautiful display and input capabilities of your phone connected. The other method of putting in text is, I think we've all gone through it. You just twist the dial around until you come A, B, C, D, E, click. Then you go E, click, and then 6, click. And that's, it's laborious and it's slow. The other way to do it is to use the touchpad on the buttons on your microphone. You need a DTMF microphone to do that, and then you do it the way that we did when cell phones first came out. We thought it was cool then, but now we would hate to have to go back to it, but it can be done. So that means that on the 2 button, it's ABC. So you click the 2 button once for A, twice for B, 3 times for C. You know the drill. And so you can input text that way. Again, it's fairly slow. And then some of them have touchscreen keyboards, like the FTM 400. And the address that you send a message to another APRS user is their call sign with the dash with their system ID. So you send it out to VA6PJB-9. Okay, and you compose the message on your radio, and the radio has a message input function. You click through to the message input function, and you compose your message, and you click send, and away it goes. And the radio will transmit that message until it receives an acknowledgement back from the destination radio. So it'll go like, usually it's about 4 or 5 times, sometimes as much as 7. So it just starts transmitting the message and listening for the acknowledgement coming back. Oh, I didn't get the acknowledgement, I'm going to transmit it again. So it does that over the course of, the first couple are within a minute of each other, and then it stretches it out. It's got an algorithm for not keep blip, 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 but it stretches it out, but eventually it gives up because it hasn't received an acknowledgement. If it does receive an acknowledgement, then game on. You know that your message has reached the other radio, and you wait for a reply to come back. Okay, now this is real time. It's two-way messaging. It's real time two-way messaging when both radios are on and both operators are present. Okay, it doesn't have any store or forward. So if one radio is off, the message is missed. Okay. Second way of sending messages on APRS is to send it to an SMS text. That is, standard text that you get on your cell phone. So you address the message to SMS GTE. So that is as if that were the call sign. Okay, so it's the SMS gateway. So SMS GTE, you don't put a -7, -9, anything, you just leave off the SSID. Okay, so you get on your radio, you get into the message function, and you put in SMS GTE. Then you go and then you click through to start inputting the text of the message. The very first thing you put in the text of the message is an @ sign, and then you put the phone number of the destination. Okay. So the message goes through, it goes on, as we mentioned before, boing, boing, hits an iGate grabs it, and then it puts it into the internet system, IS system, and an SMS server that's been programmed by a guy here in Canada, grabs that and translates it and puts it out on the phone system. And it delivers it to your destination phone. And the person who receives that message on the phone gets a text. The text says that it comes from SMS GTE. So you know how the text identify the sender. And then the very first part of the text says @ and it gives you your call sign and -7 or -9 or whatever. So VA6 BJB-7, and then a space, and then your text that you sent. Okay. The receiving phone all they have to do to send a message back to you is just respond the way they usually do on a text message. You got to give them the heads up, though. It's a limited size. It's only 57 characters. Any characters beyond 57 will be truncated. So, you know, if you think you're going to send someone to it, tell them answer in really short sentences and use multiple messages if you have to. Okay. It's unlikely that they're going to count the number of characters, but I suppose someone could. But just tell them, you know, one line, just only one line message coming back. Okay. The thing about this system is that the phone can't initiate the exchange. You can't just pick up your phone and dial away and say you're going to send it. For one thing, you don't know the number. You see, the way that they prevent spam on the APRS network is that the phone number is not given out publicly, and you only get it as a result of a text, having received a text from an APRS station. Okay? But there is a huge advantage. You can send and receive to any cell phone in North America. He hasn't implemented the international yet. The responses from the SMS, so if the person, you send something to your wife or your friend and they respond, but you've left the radio, you've gone away, or because they didn't get it in time and you're now gone, it'll hold it for 24 hours. So if you're the guy who's out in the field or the gal who's out in the field and you've sent your message and you haven't received a response, the next time you turn on your radio, it says, well, I didn't receive a response from Colleen. I wonder what happened. You type $, APRS, and M for message, and you send that to SMS Gate, and it will respond. I've got some screenshots here from, this is from a Yaesu FTM 350, the earlier version. It had a monochrome screen. It's the earlier version of what the 400 is now. It doesn't have the color screen and doesn't have the touch screen input, but it works quite well. And it's got a good APRS implementation. So this is the Yaesu 350, and it happened to be the one that was on my desk when I was making this presentation. Okay. So this is an example. You can see that it was addressed to SMS GTE, and then the phone number was put on there, and then it was a test to SMS. Okay. I don't know what happened to this slide. I had my phone numbers blanked, and I see that they're not anymore. Okay. Too late now. This is an example of the message that you can send to SMS Gate to ask it, have you got any messages that were held for me, right? There it is. It responded with this one. This is what the message looks like when it comes back from a cell phone. It said, this is a message sent from an APR when the APRS radio is not on. Okay. One of the, like I said, there's a 57 character maximum, but you can set up aliases, you can set up shortcuts, you can go on the APR SMS GTE site and find out what they are. You can also, okay, the second thing you can do about messaging is that you can actually send them a radio to email. This is a little bit more fussy, and you'll see why as I go. You can address the message, you send it to a email -2, okay? So this time there is an SSID, okay? And the first part of the thing right here is your destination email address, and then the message was test 10, okay? When you send it, the radio, if it gets the acknowledgement, will come back and it'll give you this message on your screen that says the email was sent. Okay, so that's nice. Tells you that. This is what it looks like when the person on the other end gets it. Now, it's a little bit confusing because I'm sending, and this is an incestuous message. I'm sending it to myself, right? Okay, so this is what it looks like. The VA6 PJB-10 : test 10. That's the subject line of the message. That in fact is the message. The message is in the subject line. Okay. And this is from VA6 PJB-10, and it says test 10 was the message. But then you see what it says? It says do not reply. Okay, so this is a one-way message from your radio to email. However, there is a workaround. If you want the person to be able to reply and get a message back to your radio from the email system, so that means that they would type an email and send it. It would go to an iGate. It would go to the iGate that last heard your radio. And then that iGate would transmit it out to your radio. Okay. Then you have to coach them on what you want. So if you want the recipient to be able to reply, then you have to set up an alias. You send a message to email 2 that has in its body the nickname. Here you can see that I put in the nickname Hot. Okay. And because it's a Hotmail address. So I said hot, then barrynscan@hotmail.com. Okay. That is, okay, that's how you set up an alias, and it responds and it says that alias was added, hot was added. Okay. Then once the alias is set up and you've previously coached the recipient on how to format their response, they can reply. The message goes in the subject line. They put the message in the subject line. So they type out so they can reply. The message goes to VA6 PJB-10. That happened to be the thing I had set up for that particular radio, with a colon. So they type that into their subject line, and they type the message, test 10 was received from you. And then in the body, there's nothing goes in the body of the email except this, the word user ID, colon, and then their alias, and then colon. And that allows the APRS system to identify that, the email to system to identify that this is an authorized person. They are allowed to send a message to that radio because that radio person has set them up with an alias. Okay, so that's what has to be done. So you can do the radio, the received message from the alias. This is what it looks like when it hits your radio. It came from hot, that's the alias you set up, and it was received by from you. Okay, we're coming up on 44 minutes here. We're going to try to limit this to 45. So I think we're going to go over slightly, but not much. And then we'll have time for questions. Oh, by the way, the email sender received a delivery confirmation. That's what they got back. The APRS message, hot, test 10 received from you. It was sent, and so they got an email message say it was sent to the radio and it was acknowledged. Okay. Now, the point is, this is a true store and forward. That return message that's coming back from the email, from the SMS gate, it's only for 24 hours. For the, I think it's indefinitely stored, or at least for a month or so, but I don't know that for a fact. This saves the message. If it can't get it out to your radio, it just holds it. Okay. It tries, like it tries 4 or 5 times to get you. And if it can't get you, then it just holds on to it. So if the radio is off and the recipient replies, the sender will get a message in their email that's saying delivery was delayed. And when the operator comes back on, he or she sends a message, and they send it to email 2 because they know I sent something to Joe and I haven't received a reply. So I'll just send the message to the email 2 system, and it's GET, G-E-T. Email 2 will respond and it'll spit out any messages that are waiting for you. Okay. The email 2 will respond by sending the stored missed messages, and it also sends an email to the sender to confirm the delivery. Look at that, 8:46. That's that was the time that included the introductory remarks. So I hope I didn't speed through this too fast. That's the presentation. That's the conclusion of the presentation on messaging. For I'll put in a plug here for within CARA, within the Calgary Amateur Radio Association, we have a group called the VHF Interest Group. They meet on the third Tuesday of every month at the Denny's. That's on 16th Avenue East between Deerfoot and Barlow Trail. Obviously, that's not happening these days. So they have turned their meeting into a net on the RYC repeater. So tomorrow night, Tuesday of this week, this is coming up on the 21st on 7:30 p.m. on the repeater VE6 RYC in Calgary. And it just so happens that the topic for this month's meeting was going to be APRS as a follow-up to this presentation, where participants were going to bring in their gear and show people, this is hands-on. Okay, you've seen stuff on screen, but they're going to bring real hands-on stuff and say, this is what I have. This is the way I do it. Because there's so many different ways that you can do it. Instead, what they've done is they posted pictures of their gear. Various people have said, okay, this is the way I do it. They take some pictures of it. They put that on the VHF forum that's on caraham.org, and then they're going to get on the radio and talk about it on the repeater. The problem is that that particular forum is for members only. So I know that a lot of you, I'd say about 2/3 of the registrants for this seminar are maybe half, more than half, are CARA members. So you can, for the others, you're welcome to join on the repeater. That's totally open, but the forum itself happens to be in the members only area of the CARA site. With that, we'll say that we can move on to questions. You want a little bit of humor in the middle of all this COVID? Check out Stay the Blazes Home by the Stanfields. It's a great story about how that came to be, with the Premier of Nova Scotia getting peeved at the people and telling them to stay the blazes home. And these guys turned it into a song. All right, with that, I'll turn it back to Dana. And let's take, we're about 3 minutes over time, not too bad. And we'll let Dana then say whether or not there's some questions that have come in on the chat line.
We do have a couple there, Peters, VA6DJH. Dana relaying questions. Questions, we can accept them on in the chat on the Zoom meeting. And so I have a couple, so just, I guess we can start at the beginning there. APRS, just overall APRS question from Jim V6GO. About how do you pick your path length? And so, I mean, you could set it up for a wide, 4-3, etc., or wide 2-2, or a wide 2-1, or some of these options. And the question is, okay, how would you know how to set your path length?
Okay, the recommendation for everyone on the system, certainly in the Calgary area, is to make your path length only 2. Wide 1-1 and wide 2-1. That's 2 hops. 2 hops is plenty. More than that clutters the system. In fact, the radio, my radio, the modern one, the 400, came pre-programmed that way. And when you read the documentation, it says leave it on the pre-program, but it's you can change it. This is how you change it, but we recommend that you don't. But if you were really out in the wilderness, away from civilization, and you knew that it would take more than 2 hops to get to an eye gate, then sure, increase it.
Is there a way of knowing if you'd be like if you're out in a rural area, if you would be within 2 hops or not?
I don't know. We'll have to think about that when I get back to you on that one.
Okay, there was a similar one from VA6AMX about, is there a database where you could look up different iGate locations, or a way to find out where iGates are? And that may be a similar sort of question.
Yes, I think so. On APRS.fi, I think you can tell. You know what? I'm not 100% sure on that. You should be able to click on the information on APRS.fi and find out if something's an iGate.
And so I don't know if I'd call that well, it is sort of a database, but it's more of live information. So you'll have current iGates. So iGates that are currently active, if they report their own position, you'd be able to see that from a map view on a view like APRS.fi. There was some discussion about the SMS gate.
Mm-hmm.
And the question of SMS gate is, do you need sort of for long distance, do you need the number one for if you're going to send an SMS message?
I don't think so, but I don't know that for a fact. I think it can't hurt to put it on there, right?
Okay, so the SMS gate service then, do you know if that's primarily North America? Or if I wanted to send that to somebody in Germany, would that work?
It won't work to send something from Canada to Germany. It's just that it costs money to set up these servers with their patch to a phone account, and it's all voluntary. Oh, by the way, there is you can go to the SMS GTE site on the internet, smsgte.org, and if you use the service at all, make a donation. I made a donation to them because it's all volunteer and it's all funded through donations, and
Okay,
so it is limited to only North America for the moment, and we'll see in the future whether the guy expands it.
And thank you to Dustin V6SVN, who is in the chat there, has confirmed that no, you don't need number one. It assumes that you're talking about North America when you're doing that. There was a comment that was a good one, was from a user, Spooky Tooth. They've tested this system a few years ago doing the radio SMS and found that it was easy to type on a cell phone. Typing on a radio is a pain, just like your comments there, Peter. And he referenced Jerry V6AB on his website, who had a setup for using a keyboard into a TNC. And that's I think that was to a tiny track from a PS2 keyboard that he's done for that one. So that's a good way of using putting a keyboard onto a radio. There was also an equipment specific one. I think you have one of the FTM 400s, Peter. I don't know if you would have tried it out in this way. And it had to do with using the Bluetooth module in it, as if that was a way of getting some of this information from the radio into from your phone into the radio. And sort of one of the thoughts that we had was okay. I was wondering maybe it might work if you feed the audio feed into APRS Droid or something. I don't know if they're set up to do the data side. We think in general it's probably not going to work for that, but I'm curious if you've tried the Bluetooth.
You know what? It's a good idea. I haven't tried it. I haven't found a way to get easy text input into the 400. Oh, well, the 400 though, of course, it's almost a moot point because it's got a touch screen text entry anyway. It comes up with a QWERTY keyboard right on the right on the radio. But I suppose it would be more convenient. Like when you got it in the car and you got it up on the dashboard, you have to kind of hunch over and lean forward and start touching the radio screen to type in your text. It'd be faster if you did it on your phone. So I'm going to look into that. That's a good idea. Check it out. I don't know the answer.
It could be quite interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I know Kenwood has the built-in KISS TNCs that if you can get a serial connection to it, then you can use them. I don't know that Yaesu does quite the same thing in some of their radios.
Yaesu consistently in the 350, in the 100, and the 400 have had the one-way connection out to display the map information, but doesn't accept the input coming back in the other direction.
Okay, yeah, very good. One comment about the APRS PHY, if PHY gates are using the correct display symbol, they'll show as an eye with a black diamond, and so you could find it's similar for the digipeaters, D for a digipeater, to find those on the map display. A stylus helps a ton on the 400 from V6CV. The
comment?
Yeah, that's a comment there. And I guess actually one question about software TNCs like Direwolf, is that a good way to go? Advantage.
I didn't even touch on that. That's other way to do it is with the Direwolf on a Raspberry Pi. There's so many possibilities there. There's another world there.
See, look at our time here. We're about 5 minutes before the next presentation. I guess any final questions, we should have those off there. Most likely there'll be some discussion about Dire Wolf on Tuesday night, I would imagine.
Well, thank you very much all for your attention, and hope you got something out of this presentation. And we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to be back with Vince, who's going to talk to us about vector network analyzers.
And Vince is set up to be a little bit more interactive. I think I'll be able to interrupt Vince as he's going, and if we have questions about his demos as he goes. So keep typing the questions into the comments there.
All right, then. See you all again in 3 or 4 minutes.
I think, Peter, if we could get you to stop sharing your screen, that would be.
I would if I could find the gold arm button. Oh, here it is. I'm sorry.
Perfect.
All right.
So we're close enough to 9. I'm thinking that I'm ready to switch the video over to Vince if he's ready.
Yep, Vince is ready.
Okay, so I'll just spotlight you here, and it should bring it over to you. So you're now presenting and going live. Carry on.
And did you want me to start at the top of the hour, or did you want me to start now?
Well, do you want to entertain us for 2 minutes, and then you can start at the top of the hour? How would that be?
I'll get right on that. Is what I'll do.
Why don't we have a chorus of "Stay the Blazes Home, Stay the Blazes Home."
You're doing good, Peter. Keep going.
Yeah. So Peter, before we leave, I do want to thank you for your presentation. It was actually excellent, and I'm really pleased with the pace and the content and the clarity. It was great. I'm quite pleased to want to thank you for it.
Thank you.
Apparently, the Radio Society of Great Britain's watching on the YouTube stream, so we're making some distance. DX, CQ DX. Guess we need to get them into the chat somehow.
It's working out just fine. So the one thing I won't be doing while I'm presenting is watching the YouTube stream, because that's buried away on a different desktop. So if all of a sudden I drop off of the YouTube stream, if one of you fine gentlemen would let me know, please, that would be great.
And I guess apologies to Great Britain there. We've not opened up chat on the YouTube stream itself. It's not something we got the resources to be able to monitor during this one. The YouTube stream was actually more of a last minute take, and we do this. It turns out that while the various viruses not got us, it's turning us into YouTube streamers, and so maybe that's a net positive thing.
Well, it's never a terrible thing for sure, right? So, hey, good morning. My name's Vince Dion. I am VE6 Lima Kilo. I carry an American call sign as well. I am coming to you live from Okotoks, Alberta. Now, if you believe the marketing people in Okotoks, there's lots to do in Okotoks. It's a great small town. It's located south of Calgary. Of course, now it's a little quieter. I'm delighted to be able to be here today. Thank you very much for inviting me. Special thanks to our friends from ICOM that have brought along an awesome presenter. And special thanks to all of you for taking out the time to celebrate World Amateur Radio Day with us. Today, I want to talk to you about to VNA or not VNA, with apologies to William Shakespeare. That's the question. Haven't we all wanted to build up, I'm waiting for the mouse, there we go, build up a great big antenna farm of some sort, and you take a look at my QRZ.com page and I say that there's plans are perpetually underway for a larger antenna farm. They're fun to play with, and networks, RF networks are certainly very interesting. The The thing that makes it that gives us that best diagnosis, and of course keeps our transmitters happy, is low SWR, and everybody thinks 1-to-1 SWR is kind of where it's at. That's another discussion for another day. But what I wanted to talk about today was the key differences between a scalar network analyzer and a vector network analyzer. And I'd like to ask for a show of hands. That becomes a little bit difficult, but I'm pretty well betting most of you have an SWR meter in your shack. And so you have a scalar network analyzer by definition. It measures mismatch, impedance, or gain, but it's only magnitude and not necessarily the circuit phase. Now, there are some exceptions to this rule, so I'm using some broad brush general statements. A VSWR meter is one form of an SNA. A vector network analyzer device, it measures both resistance and the phase of the circuit and the gain between the two ports on the device, because they're 2-port devices. You've by now, many of us have seen that nano VNA thing that's going around. I had one in my hands for a little bit of time. I found it tremendously tiny to use. An interesting experimentation platform for sure. But a VNA, it measures both the resistance and the phase of the circuit and the gain between those two ports. Used to measure impedance, insertion loss, and return loss. So how do you recognize one of these things in the wild when you run across it? Well, usually they've got a couple of connectors on them. And there's some exceptions to that. So in the SNA side of the slide, you can see our friend in the lower left corner, the MFJ looks like a 269C, very popular antenna analyzer. And it's got a few connectors on the top. Looks like a grounding screw and an N connector and a BNC connector sitting there. That BNC connector is actually to be used for frequency sensing. So they're not always, they don't always have two connectors on them, always have one. Let me try that again. They don't always have one connector on them. In the upper left corner, of course, is a very popular sort of field SWR meter that measures forward and reflected. And then we have our friend, the Reg Expert, and the Reg Experts are some of those hybrid devices that have some SNA-like or VNA-like capabilities, but they appear to be an SNA visually. Let's contrast that now to the right-hand side of the screen. The Agilent or the Anritsu VNA in the top corner with a plethora of functions and a plethora of commas after the dollar sign. It does everything, and as the old expression goes, it slices and dices and does everything you'd want it to. Just below that is one of the nano VNAs that's out on the market. There are many different versions of the nano VNA. There's the mini VNA Tiny, and they come in various form factors. You're kind of wondering where the screen is on that. Where's the display and the buttons? Well, that one's designed to just be hooked up to your computer and to be driven by software. And then immediately to its left is the one that I use out of the bunch. I don't know that it's the best or whatever, but it's the one that I chose. I wanted a lightweight field vector network analyzer that I could take out with me, that was reasonably durable, that allowed me to do work in the field. And that's the platform I settled on, good, bad, or otherwise. So as Dana said, this is meant to be an interactive presentation. Every once in a while, I'm going to divert my my view over that way to take a look at the chat window and see if I have any questions popping up. Excuse me.
Apparently, Spooky2's found a way to connect a nano VNA to a Samsung, so that sounds pretty interesting.
To a Samsung phone, probably. Yeah, those nano VNAs have little Bluetooth modules in them. The VNA that I'm going to show you in a few minutes has one of those as well. I can drive it from an Android device. I own one Android device in my fleet, and it's kind of interesting to be able to hook up to it that way for sure. So the base question that I want to talk about here today is: are both types good for analyzing antennas? Any other questions? It's pretty straightforward, right? They can help you analyze antennas no matter how complex or how simple the structure. The tape measure dipole up in the upper right corner, it looks like the dew line with all those log periodics on towers and a whole bunch of snow. I'm not sure what's down in the lower right corner, but I really like the look of the photo, so I'll admit I included it for that reason alone. And then a 2 to 11 gigahertz log periodic mounted just on an SMA connector in the lower left. Of course, you have to consider as you take a look at any of these devices, their operating range and what they're capable of doing, and the dynamic range around those as well. Many of the inexpensive VNAs or SNAs are marketed with ranges from DC to light, ranges from DC to 5 gigahertz. But the reality is the dynamic range, the range in which they are accurate, is only good to DC to 500 megahertz or something like that. So watch your specs carefully when you go to purchase one.
The one question, and actually you kind of hit it there, are there other things that would cause error in an SWR meter event?
There are all kinds of things that can cause error in an SWR meter, and it's probably the one piece of equipment in our shack that we don't pay enough attention to and calibrate on an ongoing basis with a known source of power and a known good test load. Yeah, you bet. So question from the chat window. Good morning, Joel. I am using the Metro VNA. The exact model number is, oh, it is the Metro VNA. Excuse me, I had that right. From Metro Power, it's an Italian manufacturer. And so why use one over the other? Well, an SNA, it gives us some simple, direct results. Maybe that's good enough for your purpose. Maybe you want to understand the antenna that you're putting on your car, what corner you want to put it on to get the best SWR. You're putting a mag mount up for an event. Sometimes we don't think about these things. We drop it on the corner of the trunk and we wonder why net control can't hear us all the time. So with an analyzer, you can drop it on the trunk and you can experiment with different locations on that. I'll show you that in a little bit in a demo. But an SNA gives you some really simple direct results. Maybe that's good enough. And for the example of, is my SWR good for my antenna that has been tested and I know that it's resonant on the frequencies that I want it to be on? Is it going to give me the best SWR if I locate it here? That's perfect. And a VNA is much more versatile. It gives a much richer set of results that an SNA cannot, but it is at the expense of being more complex to use. And these nano VNAs that are coming out today now, many people, as I watch social media and I watch discussion boards and discussion forums, many people are asking some rather simple questions. And there are procedures in order to use a VNA correctly, like calibrating it with cables, and always use the same cables and use the same connectors all of the time. All of these things matter to get proper, consistent, and repeatable test results. So what else can you do with a VNA? Well, that's the cool thing, is you can do all kinds of stuff with it. One of the very first assignments that was given to me from the Foothills Amateur Radio Society, shout out to a guy south of Calgary, they asked me to verify their open and short tuning stubs. So typically we take a spool of coax. We take a spool of coax like our friend here. Whoops, get it away from the camera a little bit more. And we have an open on one end or a short on one end, and that's a quarter wavelength long at the target frequency. And we use those as either notch reject or pass filters when we're operating multi-station. And there's a way that you can tune those by using a VNA that's quite simple. Those ones in particular, you can also get close with an SNA, but you can get bang on with a VNA. Alignment of filter cavities. Have you ever wondered the magic behind a repeater site and how you can have so many frequencies going out concurrently on an antenna? Those things are called cavities, and they're pure black magic, but to me, they're pure black magic. To many people who understand them, they're a little more easy to figure out. But a VNA allows us to tune those filter cavities. I'll give you a quick demo on that in a little bit. You can use the data to build a matching network. You can get your Smith chart displays up, which give you a visual of the complex impedance. You can test your duplexer or diplexer, you know, show of hands how many of us have a radio that's got a UHF port and a VHF port on it, on the back of it, but we only have one antenna coming out of it. So we get a duplexer or diplexer to combine those two to run out on a single line. You can check the length of a cable and many, many more. So let me get into some demos here, and we'll transition the video just a little bit so that I can get set up for it. The first thing I want to do is I want to show you what the result is of opening up, of doing a short and open detect on that coil of cable I was just showing you a minute ago. So I've got the camera set up here so that you can see what I'm doing. Here's my test lab. My test lab is simple. It's that same coil of cable, and you can see that I've got it fed out here, and my VNA is off to the right. And what I've got going on is I've got this software. So this software is running on one of my computers. It's VNAJ. It's a Java-based application. So I keep it on a virtual machine that I don't do anything else with because it's Java. There are many different freeware type applications available for SNAs. So you can see on your screen, I don't expect you to be able to read the numbers on the screen because they're pretty tiny. I might need some new glasses, and I'm sitting in front of the screen just to make a little fun out of it. But you'll note that in the middle of the screen right now, there's a peak. And so I'm going to scan, and let's see what the scan result says. So I'm just measuring SWR, and the peak stays in the middle of the screen. So now what I'll do is I'll come over here, and let's clip this shut. And I'll use my very famous Kelly clamps because I ran out of alligator clips. And now let's run a scan again and see what the difference is. Well, that's pretty notable right there, hey? So now have you ever done a mobile installation and it's not quite working right and the SWR isn't what you think it is? Well, here's an easy way to tell whether you've got an open or a short in your circuit rather than having the SWR dipping where you expect it to. An open or a short shows up as very simply waves. Let me open it back up again and show you the difference. So we can take a look at it and we can see multiple different waves coming in, and one is totally opposite to the other. So that's a real quick, easy way to take a look at that. Now let me get set up for the next demo. Moving a few cables around here on the shack. I'll save you that fun of watching me do that.
Of course, one of the nice things about having the frequency variability is that a dummy load's got a really good SWR, doesn't it?
A dummy load is always perfect SWR, if you bet. So now let's take a peek at, that's exactly the shot I'm looking for. So now I've got my friend, the resonance cavity. It's got an innie and an outie, as Peter Risdall would say. Thanks, shout out to Peter Risdall, 36 Kilo Kilo, who helped me to build this presentation. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure my return loss and nothing else. And I'm going to switch the mode to transmission. And what this does is in an SNA, normally the detecting signal goes out the port and it's reflected back and it's measured. In a VNA, I can do it that way and use it effectively as an SNA, or in this case, in the transmission mode, I'm going to go out on one port and come back in on the other. So when I run a single scan on this particular can, on this particular cavity, and that's not what I'm after. I'm after return loss. Let me try this again. Demos always work perfectly when you set them up, but when you go to do them live, as any of you know, they become a different matter entirely. There we go. So I am hoping that what I'll be able to do with you today, I'm going to leave this on running now. And as I adjust the length of the rod, I hopefully Should be able to move that nice big dip on the right-hand side of the screen down. Don't we hate it when a demo doesn't do what it's supposed to do? So we're going to try that again. That was working earlier this morning. It was just awesome when it was too, I might add. What I've done to make the screen appear a little bit goofy like that is I've widened the scanning range. It's running from 100 to 180 megahertz. My particular analyzer can go up to 250 megahertz. So what we should really clearly see as I move the rods up and down, which adjust the space inside the cavity, is I should be able to see these curves moving along with it. Well, this is what happens when a demo doesn't work. I'm going to have to ask you folks to all trust my smiling face when I say, normally when I line up a canister, line up a cavity, that it works a little bit better for me. But the idea is to take the rods and adjust them in such a way that I can move that curve down to where I need it to get to the notch or the dip on the spectrum analyzer so that I can make the cavity do what I need it to do. Let me set up for the third demo. So earlier on, I was talking about what happens when we've got our friend the quarter wave antenna out on the car, and we're trying to figure out exactly what the SWR is going to be of it. So you can see what I've got a ground plane here. I've got some magnetic wall tack strips here that about 18 inches long. They're a little bit too short for 2 meters. There we go. They're bolted up in the middle, and they serve as real fine rapid deployment antenna ground planes, if a little bit small. And so we'll do a couple of simple tests here. First off, what I want to do is I want to go back to the analyzer, and I want to ratchet in the range a little bit. We're going to look at SWR, and I'll do it as a simple reflection scan. And we can see that the SWR is kind of all over the map. So have you ever wondered what's the effect of getting your hand in the near field on an antenna? So as I sweep my hand along, you'll see that the range on it changes. Of course, that's once I hook up the antenna. Like I say, in rehearsal, demos always go perfectly, but in real life, we get something else entirely.
Even for digital TV, if you hold your hand to the right spot on the rabbit ears, it might actually help.
Yeah, you never know, Dana. All right, so let's get the curve. There we go. That's what I was looking to see. I love it when a plan finally does come together. So, boy, oh boy, you ever wonder what the effect of putting your body near an antenna is? What we've done is, in this case, with moving that dip to the right on the screen, is we've moved that resonance point much higher. I'm sure it would show a whole wealth of information if we were to bring that up on a Smith chart. And as I move it along the antenna, it lowers the resonant feed point, of course. So that's one thing to note. Now, if we take a look at what happens, so we all of us Aries guys, we carry around a cookie sheet of some sort, and this is one I use when I'm building things because it keeps I throw all the parts inside here that I'm soldering up, and they never roll off the edge of my bench. That's what happens with our curve. Keep your eye on that curve for a minute. If we put it in the middle of a pie plate, well, we can see that. But now let's take a peek at the antenna analyzer itself. We'll compare some things. That's the view that I want. I'm gonna have to reset my analyzer. Live demos are great, aren't they, folks?
We realized in the practice that I think I finally discovered a secret is that the master bakers, they must actually tune their pans for resonance.
Yes, yeah, and we'll see that in just a minute.
And so I don't have enough flour around, but maybe I'll try some baking later. Usually got to be careful sneaking things out of the wife's kitchen.
All right, so let's see. That's in the middle of a baking sheet that is not 19 inches in every direction. And that's at a VHF frequency, so we can see the SWR very clearly there. Is a 2 point something, almost 3. And all of a sudden, if I start laying my hands around it, does it affect that SWR a bunch? Yeah, it does. The closer I get to the tip of the antenna, of course. This is a demo antenna I use, which is why it's got all these crazy flags on it. If I had some RF going through it, a little red light would light up. So that's all good. Now, somebody said to me the other day that I did this demo once, and they said it was quite a difference when they saw how the placement of an antenna on the ground plane affects the SWR. And sure enough, what I was talking to a bit earlier on was the location of it and how you would tune for best use. And so if we take that antenna and kind of casually put it out on the edge of the ground plane, on the edge of the trunk, if you will, for an event, well, gee, what does that do to the resonance? Well, gee, or the SWR, gee, it looks just awful, right? As we bring it back towards the center, a little bit closer. And I have no idea what's behind the hidden curtain hiding the mess on my workbench. I'm sure there's a few metallic objects, but again, for purpose of demo, this is just fine and dandy. Oh, put it in the middle of the ground plane, and all of a sudden, look at the SWR. Well, what does that tell us from a placement perspective? If we're setting up really quick for a field event with a mag mount antenna like this, we want to get it as close to the middle of the ground plane as possible. So does more metal make for better SWR? Well, we can find out that answer pretty quick. Take my hand away, maybe a tiny, tiny bit. And then if we just return back to the pie plate, nope, that's too small in every direction, right? So we could sit and play with this all day. Not my intent. My intent today is to introduce you to a couple of the things that a VNA can measure off and help you with. I'm just going to look to the chat window for a moment and see if any questions have popped up.
I think everybody's mesmerized with the demo right now.
And so Jeremy is asking what might be the error factor in some SWR meters. And Jeremy, from my experience, the error rate can be anything from a few percent to a lot of percents, 15 or 20. So if you have a question, Confucius has its expression. Confucius say, man with watch knows what time it is, man with two never quite sure. Man with SWR bridge knows what his SWR is, man with two never quite sure. And so you'll have to have an instrument that you trust in order to verify the calibration of your SWR bridge or your test equipment before you can be reliant upon it in any case. All right. Flipping back to the presentation.
Any comments, Vince, about S parameters? I know they've got like S11, S12, and how do you figure out what those are? What does that mean?
Oh, hey, that's a great question, Dana. Thanks. Let me retrieve my gear from the demo table. And actually, I'll just flip to a full front camera view here for just a minute. So there's my VNA, and you can see nice and small, and that was one of the reasons I purchased it. And so there are the nomenclature on an SNA is port 1, port 2. So S11 says go out port 1 and come back port 1. S12 says go out port 1 and come in port 2, et cetera, et cetera. That's how that nomenclature works. Nice and simple. So by definition then, with most SNAs having just one port, they're measuring S11 modes if they are vector-based analyzers. Not all single port devices are, some of them are, some of the rig experts, for example.
One question, if you know a typical cost range for VNA devices. I know when I start looking at the high-end ones, it's more than a house.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And you know, I know there are many people that have joined our conference today, and welcome to all of you. Many that have joined the conference that work with VNAs far more often than I do. I'm a hobbyist enthusiast at best. The price range for an appliance like this is 450 Canadian dollars and up. When I was shopping for mine, I was seeing kits that one could build that were reasonably good, based around the same chipset as this. From memory, the SI5351. I saw kits at around $250 that required the ability to know how to wave solder large surface mount devices and load code, all the way up to a couple $1,000s, and certainly the bench quality equipment, the Hewlett Packard devices, et cetera, the world. Just start putting commas in the numbers, and you get some idea that the price of a small house would be correct. I'm getting my results, and reasonably good field results, close enough for me to know if I need to bring a piece of equipment back in from the field and put it across a spectrum analyzer or a service monitor for $460 if memory serves.
So yeah, definitely some becoming quite affordable. Does SWR change with power output, Vince?
SWR should not change with power output, but if you are seeing a change in SWR with power output, you have something else going on in your system. Maybe you've got a little bit of water in the feed line, and it jumps across and it starts reflecting back with a higher power level. Pure speculation. Let's come back here, and I'm pretty close to wrapping up the information I had to present to you folks today. Once we post the slides, I believe it's our intention, CARA's intention, to post the slides. You'll see the source of information and the reference material that I've shared, or that I based this presentation upon. Feel free to visit those links. Certainly, I've spoken about the Nano VNA product a little bit. I had one in my hands. It wasn't my cup of tea. It's an excellent experimenter's platform. I would never characterize it as being a platform that we'd want inexperienced folks to go into and be fully reliant on their results. Do a lot of reading on it. Take your time to learn about your device, be it one of these or one of those, before you become reliant on it. It's a great experimenter's platform, and certainly to do some really fast SWR measurements. You get you in the ballpark. I can't speak to its accuracy, but only for lack of experience. Dana, if there's no other questions in the chat window, I am at the end of my presentation time slot. Or I'm at the end of my presentation, excuse me, quite ahead of my presentation time slot is what I meant to say.
There's a request, maybe it's an unpracticed demo. How would you figure out measuring a cable length?
How would you practice? And that's a function that I know this device does. And let's see how fast I can figure that out.
And apparently QST Magazine has a review of the Nano VNA, the latest version of that one. So anybody subscribed, remember the ARRL, you can see that review of the Nano VNA by Phil Salas. Is there a call sign for Phil there, John? We'll see if he's able to find that or not. Oh yeah, yes, but forget. Okay. Have to find him on the air at some point.
So yes, I can do that. So what I'm going to do is take that same unknown length of cable. It really is unknown to me. The same length of cable I had out earlier on the table that I was doing the open short test with.
Maybe for those not familiar, it's a bad idea to put power into a VNA. You don't want to be putting high power signals into those.
No, not at all. This one does measure power, but it measures it at negative. The high power measurement is negative 60 dBm, which is less than a milliwatt if my memory serves. So on the front of this device, it asks me to name the cable. That's RG58. It's RG58, and if memory serves, it tells me, you may not be able to read this, that's a velocity factor of 0.66. So that's what it says it is. So let's hit the button. And it seems to think that little spool of cable is 25 feet long. So that's interesting and quick. Is it super accurate? It may not be. Does it get you in the ballpark? How big is that coil of coax that I found at the flea market? Probably it does.
Well, or distance to a short or a fault in the cable.
Or distance to short or fault, exactly. Vince, do you find that the unit's touchscreen okay? For complex setups, mostly use software. Joel, I find that the touchscreen, so I have the world's smallest fingers. I don't. I like to think of my fingers as somewhat pudgy. I find it reasonably acceptable. You're asking me about graphing results. And so my center frequency is down in HF. So you can notice I'm using a stylus, and that's a preference. And certainly when I want to do some more fine work on it, I'll use that stylus. So here's that same test I was showing you before, right? The wires are open. And if I go and grab the wires and close them, what does that do to the trace? So I can do some of these things on screen reasonably well. Down along the bottom, it shows us what the center frequency is, what the upper range is, what the lower range. So it's a 30 megahertz sweep in this case. It's not too bad. The stylus works quite well, though. I'm really pleased with it. And I'm just looking to see if I've caught all the questions in the chat. It looks like I have. I don't know if, from a schedule perspective, if we wanted to move forward or not, but if there's no other questions, I will say thank you very much to CARA for having me around today for this presentation. I thank you for your time. Thanks for coming out. Enjoy World Amateur Radio Day, and I'll see you down the road somewhere.
Right on. Thanks, Vince. Yeah, very, very interesting. Good job from Amir and quite a few other folks as well in the chat. I guess we could get John's audio up and whatnot. I'm not sure we published start times and whatnot. I don't know if there'll be other individuals coming in at the expected start time for the next presentations. Feel free to say something, Pat, if you want.
Sorry, Dana, Pat here. I had a little trouble finding the screen or finding the place to unmute my mic. I apologize. Yeah, that was very good, Vince, and appreciate it. I think we need to come up with some jokes and so on. I will unmute John here as soon as I've got confirmation that he's not in a private conversation or something. That would be most unfortunate, so bear with me. If there's any sort of off-topic questions that people wanted to enter on the chat, that would be okay too.
Yeah, I've actually I think it's a Nano VNA. I've got one of those ones as well. I mean, the price point reached the point where it's actually worth trying out. So I didn't even know the thing had Bluetooth in it. I may have to explore that.
Just a little bit more, hey? Well, you know, if you need a little bit of filler content while John is getting ready, certainly I have that multi-instance SDR stuff that I've been playing with. I can talk about for a few minutes if you gentlemen would like.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's good to target the start time on time and not too much early if anyone comes to join just for that content. And so, yeah, that sounds like a very interesting topic.
Well, then let's see what I can do. I don't expect you folks to be able to see my screen and read the detail on it, but we all love to play with, or many of us love to play with software-defined radios. And my particular passion in during these times of stay-at-home-itis has been to see how many different scans of WSJT instances I can get to post packets up on PSK Reporter, kind of as an indication of what propagation I should be able to hear from my station and what propagation we should be able to hear from the grid square. Many of us in Calgary, of course, we share 4 grid squares, and I'm down in the southeast grid square for DO30. And so what I've done is I'm going to set up a couple of things here in remote. The screen you're staring at right now is my ham radio computer. It's a Windows 7 machine that's located just to the right of my sitting position, and it's also the one where I do all of my digital modes at. So there we go. Now I've got things set up the way that I need you folks to be able to see them. I've got a computer in my shack that does nothing but sit and monitor spots and packets. It does a couple of other things as well. It's a Raspberry Pi based computer, and it runs a piece of software called Ham Clock on it, which looks an awful lot like a geochron. It presents additional information. I can see the solar flux at my location is 69. The A and the K, and it tells me what my spots are. So the K is at 1. It's quiet right now. It gives me a mock-up of what the solar is. I can see different views, the magnetogram, or I can see the composite view of same. And it, of course, gives me gray line, tells me when the beacons are up, on what frequency, the IARU beacons, and it's all coordinated and tied in real time. And so with these reports, they are all being driven off that other computer, which is this one right here. And so what I've done is I've taken an SDR play. I have an RSP2 Pro. It's an awesome receiver, nice and sensitive. There's different receivers on the market. This is the one I've settled on. And I discovered through doing some reading that you could run multiple instances of WSJT software And of course, with SDR Play, SDR Uno software, you can run multiple virtual receivers. And so I've got this setup running 4 different receivers. Let me simplify it down a bit first so that there's a little less visual overload on the screen. So I have my master receiver and my local oscillator running at 17.6 megahertz. The range of listening that I'm doing on my SDR is 8 megahertz. So that means I can be plus or minus 4 megahertz of that local oscillator frequency. So if I want to listen to 15 meters, 12 meters, 10 meters, or 15 meters, 17 meters, 20 meters is what I had it set up for. I can straddle that local oscillator and still be within the range of my receiver, being 8 megahertz wide, in this case, the virtual receiver. This is
Anyway,
the,
Vince, to zoom in on any of those windows there, the resolution that's being sent out isn't wonderful.
I don't have any way to do that, I'm afraid, Dana.
Okay.
Indeed, but the concept still hold to have a virtual receiver here sitting at 15 megahertz, listening at 15 meters rather, 21 megahertz, and I've got my instance of WSJT set up to run at 15 meters. So then what I can do is I can run additional instances of WSJT as soon as they want to come up. And then we'll see the WSJT, it'll come up with its little spectrum graph and the signals it might be listening to. And it's listening to that receiver and so on and so forth. And then the next instance that'll come up, once again, demos don't always work as they should. We'll just listen to two. We'll just watch 2 instances come up. I can then pick packets up from multiple sources at once so that they are broadcasting all kinds of packet information off to PSK Reporter. So how did I do this? There are some rather hard to find documents on WSJT about how to start it from a command line with icons. And you notice I've got some icons down here in the lower right-hand corner of my screen. And what you can't read is they're for instance number 1, instance number 2, and instance number 3. I set up my SDR Uno software and locked down the positions of the windows and the number of virtual receivers I had. And I use virtual serial port software to do the cat control between this commanding software and this virtual radio. And I use virtual audio cables between the sound card effectively in this software and the sound output from this virtual receiver. It makes it nice and simple when you start to build this up. If you get one instance of it running and then start to layer on the multiple instances, it's limited by the bandwidth of the SDR receiver, in my case, 10 megahertz. So I can't listen very well to frequencies at 10 megahertz and frequencies at 21 megahertz because they're 11 megahertz apart. So that's outside of the range of my receiver. But if I'm satisfied with staying within that range of my receiver, I can still pick up 2 or 3 really common bands where people are active all the time. It's especially interesting to leave one of these instances running on 10 meters and one of them running on 15 meters to see if we're seeing any sporadic E or 10 meter propagation, as we might tend to see a little bit at this time of year. So from time to time, I'll set one of these up on 10 meters, or I will indeed go over to my physical installation of WSJT and my physical radio, my FT450 on the bench, and I'll set it up for 10 meters and let it run all day. And then I have a total of 4 instances running off of this computer and putting packets up on PSK Reporter. I don't know if there are any questions that naturally come up at this time, please.
I guess about the hardware, do you have, if there's preferred brand of SDR that works well for you and whatnot. I tend to drool over the USRPs at some point. I don't have the national security budget to get one of those.
There's as many SDRs as there are radios out there. I've have a little bit of experience with Lime as a user. I own an SDR Play, as somebody has put in the chat. It's replaced the RTL SDR as a good starting performance for a low price. It's good performance, DC to daylight kind of listening, and I agree with all of those comments for sure. There are many different SDRs out there. This was the platform I settled on, and I'm real happy with the choice and with the flexibility that it gives me for certain. Do I have a preferred brand of SDR? I don't know that I have a preferred brand. I'm happy with what I've got, but there are a whole bunch of them out there, and this one fits my budget too. And I don't know about you guys, but my budget level is the word frugal. But I think that's pretty typical for most radio amateurs, right?
You've seen some interesting things done with the Hack RF1 platform as well. That's also an SDR type setup, but you actually have a low power transmit ability out of that. So Great Scott Gadgets classified that as test equipment, and so they've considered it that way to allow sort of very low power transmit, and so not just receive out of those.
Yeah, indeed. All right. Well, event control. Is our next presenter ready?
Well, John is ready, and I'm just wondering if he is prepared to entertain us for a few minutes so that we can try and get to arrive at the target time for the beginning of his presentation. I see him shaking his head in the video there, but I don't have any jokes.
Well, we might just be on a break at this point then.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking what we could do is actually, in fact, do that. Have a bio break, let people wander off to their respective locations where they can update their coffee and whatever, and then I can put John on and have him start at about, like he can start streaming at about 5 minutes too, and he could entertain us for 5 minutes just answering our questions, and then we can let him start his presentation. Right,
I see John
there.
shaking his head. So, hey, thanks very much, folks. Appreciate your time today, and thanks for letting me try to entertain you and fill in a bit of the gap. I'm looking forward to what John's got to say. I saw a sneak peek of it a few nights ago when we were doing rehearsal, and he's a brilliant guy who has a really great balanced view on many things. So I'm sure you're in for a treat. There you go, Pat. Take over the video feed. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, folks. There we go. I thought I could highlight myself at least to keep people entertained. Wasn't really prepared for a brief intermission here, but at least give you guys a chance. And as I said, I don't have any jokes, but I should throw up some pictures maybe of our club and so on here. And as I say, anything you want to ask kind of off topic, go ahead and enter it into the chat, and then Dana and I can play with that. So thank you very much, and we'll come back in about 5 minutes or so.
I guess I have a microphone, so I can just talk instead of typing into the chat there. Doug's asking if we're going to be leaving the YouTube up and whatnot. And I guess on that front, there's really not a plan on that at the moment. The more specifically is we thought of the YouTube streaming as an alternative to trying to capture recording on it. And then like, well, but hold on, if it's there already, then maybe we can make that more available. And so that's a pretty neat idea. We like doing that. Might have to figure out some post processing. So I said I've never put anything up there before, and so it's the first time for me to be actually streaming any kind of anything to YouTube. Period. And so I don't know, maybe this lockdown is going to convert me into being a YouTube streamer and a video editor, and maybe I'll have another career for seeing, depending on how oil goes, which is very impactful to me personally. So call it free training.
Yeah, I've got some pictures streaming. I'm not sure. I'm just going to double check to see if this is coming on to the YouTube channel or not. Dana, maybe you can help me with that. I've shared my browser here, so
coming out on YouTube, you bet.
Yeah, 20 seconds ago it was good, and so if you haven't changed anything in 20 seconds, then you're good. Maybe for anybody listening there's from with the Zoom display is actually very live. I don't know what the lag would be, but it'll be in the measure of milliseconds. But to the YouTube stream, the default it sets is going to be 20 or 30 second lag to what happens there. So you want to see what's actually going out to the world. That's the delay that it takes. There are some options in the YouTube stream. You can tell it ultra, fast and whatnot. If we were actually doing a YouTube one with the YouTube chat, that becomes more important, so that so you can actually, you don't have that lag for that one. But I guess what they tell you in the YouTube thing is you can't do as high of a resolution of a stream with the lower latency. But also they say a lot of the viewers might end up seeing buffering more often, because one of the ways it reduces that latency is by reducing the buffer that it uses.
I see I have to fix some of the pictures in the gallery on the website there.
Well, it looks like Field Day is still going on, and so Field Day could look very different this year. I guess anybody that wanted to get a mobile HF setup working, this is maybe a good opportunity to target that for Field Day and see how that works. We might see a lot more, single operator, single station stations happening for Field Day. So that the scoring log could be very interesting this year.
I don't want to give away, competitive information here from Shea VE6 Lima Kilo, but there happens to be another ham who is within the 1,000 foot circle who lives near me, and he and I are quite chummy. And so we're thinking about doing a socially distant station that's still within the 1,000 foot circle, and see how that works out.
I wonder what would have if you actually made a circle and just line up mobiles the appropriate distance apart around that, how many you could actually get going without completely desensing everybody else.
Yeah, indeed. It would be an appropriate moment though for me to just say shout out to a few friends that I see here today. First off, Peter Berry did a great presentation. I see Jeremy here. I see Terry Finn, Amir, of course. I see Greg in there somewhere, Dustin, 6 Charlie Victor, Gary, Paul Veal from ICOM. Welcome aboard, Paul. Thank you so much for coming in today and lining up our next guest speaker. And Paul had to sign on an hour earlier than everybody else because he's on West Coast time, of course. I see a few people that I recognize names from on APSN. Thank you very much. I see Ray out there and Josh. Did I say Greg already? Andrew, Ian, Jim Weissert, of course, Gary up in Red Deer. That's great. Of course, our friends from the Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club have come along, and our friends from across the pond in the UK have joined us from the RSGB. Joel Rayner, Gary Spicer, Barry, and pardon if I've missed anybody as I scroll through the list of attendees. We're delighted to have all you folks with us today. Thanks very much.
Okay, well, I'm going to turn on John's video and I'll let him begin kind of entertaining us, at least for the short term here, and then he can start his presentation in about 4 minutes. That'd be perfect. So go ahead, John. Oh, sorry, we have to unmute you. There we go. I think we've lost the mic there. So just keep trying there, John. I think you're unmuted at this moment.
Okay,
Perfect.
have you got me there?
Yes.
I switched back to, I tried to do something a little different this morning with the earbuds and the microphone, but obviously that did not work. So I guess we're ready to start or can get going now. Get things adjusted here. Welcome to my shack. As you see, my work table in the background. My radios are over to the side here. I can't really show those without moving the camera, but this is my combination shack, office, operating position, and second workbench as well. So, and good morning. I'm located just outside Atlanta, Georgia. My call is WB4QDX, as you'll see in my title slide. I'm going to bring that up. And I've been active in D-Star since about 2008. I'll call myself one of the early adopters of D-Star. It really got my interest back. I had been doing, well, I've been licensed since 1969. Just to give you a little ancient history, was licensed while I was in high school, and was able to get my general and then my advanced class FCC license, and then went off to college. Couldn't do a lot of amateur radio at that point, except for mobile operation, VHF, UHF, VHF primarily at that point. I moved to, and I grew up, by the way, in the Middle Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee area. We moved to the Atlanta area in 1981. I've been involved with repeaters, VHF and then UHF repeaters for a good part of my amateur life. Got back into HF after 9/11. Got back interested in some additional work on HF and started exploring that again. Around 2008, I got into D-Star. I was introduced to it by a friend who he and I both have become very active in it. I will say I'm also a fan and enthusiast of all the digital voice modes, which I'll talk about in the presentation. But D-Star is probably the one I spend the most time with, and have talked with a lot of groups about them and very active. One of the reasons I kind of got involved in D-Star in a bigger way in our state, Georgia. I made a presentation back in 2009, I believe it was, to the Georgia Emergency Management Agency. They had heard a little bit about it from our friends over in neighboring Alabama, who had purchased 12, I think, brand new D-Star repeaters from ICOM when they were first being introduced. Georgia Emergency Management Agency had heard about D-Star and asked for a presentation. Somehow I got nominated to do that. We had access at that point in kind of the early days to several of our Georgia Public Broadcasting towers, which are located all around the state. And at that time, the person who was vice president of engineering, who was also an amateur radio licensee, asked during their conversion to digital television if we could locate and what would we want to locate on the towers around the state. So in talking with GEMA at the state level, they said, what do you need to take this very widespread over the state of Georgia? And naturally, the answer is money. So over the next year, we worked with them and were able to secure a grant from GEMA, from FEMA funds, of about $250,000, of which we purchased several full D-Star repeater stacks, which I'll explain what that is. And then also a seed stock of radios, which were distributed to a lot of the emergency management agencies around the state. Here we are much later in that process, and we probably have about, I'm going to say, between 45 and 50 D-Star repeaters around the state that we were able to deploy. And I'll share with you one of the reasons that we chose D-Star as I get into this. So if we're ready, everyone, I'll launch into my presentation. All right. Hopefully,
I would say I'll give you a yes. We're ready, John.
okay. And hopefully are you now seeing my screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, again, John Davis, WB4QDX is my call. And I am located just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, in the southeast U.S. And we do have quite a bit of D-Star activity around. We also formed the group, which we call Georgia D-Star, with our peach with the antenna tower on it, as a way to kind of offer and support a lot of the D-Star repeaters around the state, offer training and programs and other activities to kind of support the D-Star repeaters around the state. And that is a mix of both funded ones, which we receive through our Georgia Emergency Management Agency grant, and a bunch of private repeaters as well. So there's been a lot of growth in the state, and D-Star is a very popular mode here in Georgia, and I will say across the Southeast. Before I get into D-Star in much detail, I would like to spend just a few moments talking about the differences between digital and analog radio. We're all pretty familiar with analog, our standard FM, which we see on VHF and UHF very, very prominently and have been for several decades. And we know as the signal level decreases, as shown by the green line on the graph, you start hearing noise, other things popping in. You're less than full quieting, as we say, and that degrades as the signal strength also degrades down to a point where the noise pretty much overtakes the signal. And that's indicated by the threshold line near the bottom of the screen. Now, digital acts much differently, and it takes a little bit of getting used to sometimes to understand the differences. But because you are transmitting ones and zeros, basically, the audio quality stays pretty much the same, even as the signal strength degrades down to a point where it cannot fully reproduce and give you back the analog voice component. And that generally is down to a point where if you were listening on analog, it would be pretty noisy. But what happens, you've got this kind of no man's land where you have the sharp curve that shows where a digital drops off. And you'll start to hear a little bit of warbling or breaking up of the audio. And that generally means that you're getting down to the point where it cannot reconstruct the voice. But if you had been listening on a comparable analog radio, FM, at the same point, then the signal would be almost unreadable. Now, different digital technologies handle that sharp curve at the end, that drop off, differently. And one of the things I will say is in D-Star, it was chosen with the chipset that is in the radio that even though it may not fully reproduce the audio signal back, reconstruct it from the noise, the added noise component, and the higher bit error rate, as we call it, you will get what we like to call in D-Star R2D2. And for those of us that are fans of Star Wars, we know what that sounds like, and it's a very similar sound. Now, other digital technologies may not allow that kind of no man's land and may just cut off the signal. And that's generally one of the things that a lot of people get, well, they're not used to and have to adjust, because your signal is generally there or it's not there. So with that, it's a little bit of getting used to. All right. Now let's talk a little bit about the digital signal in general. Now we are talking with voice, which is analog, and it's converted to data. So what is actually being transmitted on a digital radio is actually a data stream of ones and zeros in different formats. Now data itself, like keyboard data or file data or GPS position data, may be added to the voice to produce a single data stream, and that contains both voice and data. And that way you can transmit voice and data simultaneously. Now the radio is modulated just like you would if it was totally a digital radio or a data radio, and what is actually being transmitted over the air is a bit stream. Now, what does that sound like on an FM radio? It will sound like kind of a hiss or a buzz if you are monitoring that. So if you're tuned on an FM radio, standard FM radio, and listening to a digital signal, whether it be D-Star, DMR, System Fusion, any of those, you will hear that as kind of a hiss or a buzz. Sound very strange. You may think it's you're receiving noise of some kind, but that is actually the carrier. I see a question, does D-Star have the ability to add some extra redundancy error correction for marginal conditions? On the voice side, yes, very much so. There is additional bits that are added in to actually help at the higher bit rates to reconstruct the data, which allows it to operate at lower signal level conditions. Very good question. Now, another thing we'll talk about on in terms of a digital versus analog signal, the occupied bandwidth. With standard FM repeaters, we think in terms of we're transmitting 5 kilohertz modulation bandwidth. Well, that's actually plus or minus 5. And if you look at the actual spectrum that a standard 5 kilohertz FM signal occupies, it's as much as about 16 kilohertz wide on the band. And that's because in FM, it's 2 times the highest modulating frequency plus 2 times the bandwidth. So 5 kilohertz plus 10, you're modulating up to about 3 kilohertz. So 2 times that, 10 plus 6, 16 kilohertz. And that is the actual emission designator for a standard FM signal. Now, let's compare that to digital. Digital doesn't have a lot of high modulating audio frequencies, and it is occupying a much narrower spectrum. D-Star, for example, if you look at the emission designator for it, it is actually 6.25 kilohertz. Now, different digital modes, such as DMR, System Fusion, etc., may occupy a little bit more or less, but they are typically much less than a standard FM signal. Now, that will help out in terms of adjacent channel interference for repeaters. It may also allow us to put more repeaters, more signals within a band because they are a narrower signal. So that's a general rule that digital voice and data occupies less spectrum than analog FM for the amateur radio modes that we're talking about. All right, let's talk specifically about D-Star. In the early days of D-Star, it was thought that it was a proprietary standard, but in fact, that is not the case. It is an open standard for digital voice and data designed specifically for amateur radio. Now, what do I mean by that? One of the features of D-Star, as opposed to some of the other digital modes, is that your call sign is actually transmitted along with it. And I'll talk about the differences and why that makes a difference in a little bit later in some of the slides. D-Star radios are available from ICOM and Kenwood. For years, ICOM was the only company that adopted the D-Star standard, but Kenwood a few years ago offered the new radio, the D74, which is an excellent radio as well, and fully implemented the D-Star standard as well. Now, D-Star is one of several digital modes that are used in amateur radio. Among those are System Fusion and DMR. Those are two of the most popular ones in amateur radio, but you also have others, including NXDN, which is a standard jointly developed for commercial radios by ICOM and Kenwood. And then you have P25, which is the North American digital standard for generally public safety applications. Now, there are several others in different parts of the world as well, but the three predominant ones that you will see are D-Star, DMR, and System Fusion for most amateur radio operation. DMR is a European standard similar to P25, but it was adopted for, again, trunked radio system, public safety radio systems, etc., land mobile radio, and has been brought into amateur use as a very robust standard for digital voice in amateur radio. System Fusion is a standard developed by Yaesu and has become very popular as well. Now, D-Star was developed by the Japan Amateur Radio League, which the best way I relate to the JARL, it's kind of a combination of the ARRL and the FCC in the US. So they're kind of a regulatory body, but also have a lot of the characteristics of ARRL. But it was something that was developed by them as an open standard and is well documented. It uses the AMB vocoder chip, and that's from a family of chips from a company called DVSI. And most of the digital standards that we have today for digital voice use chipsets from the DVSI family of chips. And what's that is used for to convert analog speech to data and vice versa, back and forth. So almost every one of the digital radios has a vocoder chip, which is a voice coder, which in a sense acts as a modem, but it moves voice to data and then data back to recreate the voice. Looking at specifically what D-Star can do, again, we alluded that you can transmit and receive voice and 1200 baud data, similar to packet speed, simultaneously on 2 meter, 440, and even the 1.2 gigahertz band. Now, you don't need a TNC to do the data part because every radio has a serial data port on the radio itself. Your call sign is sent with each transmission, and this is something I always point out to people. If you are a serial kerchunker, as I say, on repeaters, your days of being anonymous are probably numbered, because when you key a D-Star radio, the call sign is displayed on all radios receiving the signal. Now, we do have a higher speed data mode that is available on 1.2 gigahertz. It's called DD mode, digital data. And with many of the repeaters that have connectivity on the 1.2 gigahertz data receivers to the internet, it can act as a bridge to the internet with a little bit higher. Now, we don't think of 128 kilobits as being very fast in today's world of smartphones and LTE and data in megabits and tens of megabits and et cetera, et cetera. But in the field, if you need connectivity, and this is configured as an IP type of transmission, so it can act as an Ethernet bridge to the internet, or it could act a point-to-point Ethernet bridge between two radios capable of doing the DD mode on 1.2 gigahertz. Now, there's another feature in D-Star called DPRS, very similar to APRS, and it is an automatic position reporting, but it is simultaneously transmitted with the voice from GPS built into the radio. So it doesn't require a separate TNC on a separate frequency as APRS does. So every time you transmit, it will actually have the capability of sending voice, or excuse me, your position along with that. And that can be decoded on the far end. It can be displayed on websites. It can actually be displayed with things like APRS.FI by putting in. You will see, if you go to APRS.FI, you will see a combination of both APRS and DPRS positions reported there as well. Another function of DSTAR is to allow very flexible repeater linking through its built-in, or not built-in, but a gateway PC, which is located at each repeater with an internet connection. So that allows you to link multiple repeaters together into what we call reflectors. And reflectors are like a conference bridge. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about those as well. Now, something that has come on the scene over the last few years are hotspots. This began early with a couple of products called a DV dongle and a DV access point, but that has really grown with several folks developing hotspots and offering those. And what that allows is kind of like a wireless router, but it allows your local radio to access the DSTAR network through a hotspot. I have one that I will show you, and I have a slide that will talk about that a little bit more as well. Now, some features of DSTAR radios, most of them, and I think all of them, have a built-in GPS receiver that is used to know the current position of your radio, but also that can be used to display the nearest repeater location. The current models also include an internal database of repeaters. In fact, they come out of the box. You can get on the air immediately and turn on GPS and find the nearest repeater. They will have an SD card, and that is used for storing multiple memory files, different configurations. You can actually record QSOs, and then that's also used for firmware upgrades. There is a serial data connector. Generally, that's just a 3-pin connector. On most of the radios, especially the handhelds, like this one shown, the ICOM ID51A, it is a 3-pin phone type connector with transmit data, receive data, and ground. On some of the mobile units and other ones, the Kenwood D74 has that as a USB connector as well. So a variety, but you are able to send and receive data. You can get information out of the radio and also transmit the information as well. I think one of the earlier presenters was talking about in Yaesu, that's pretty much configured as a data out only. Now, something that was introduced with some of the later models of the ICOM radios and then also carried into the Kenwood D74 when it came out was DR, or digital repeater mode. And that allows a new user to get on the air, took a lot of the complexity of the programming out of, or made it much easier. And that's shown here on this radio, where you see on the display, you have a to field, TO, and a from field. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that allows you to do. But in the short version, you select the repeater that you would like to transmit into on the from field. And then on the to field, you decide what you want to do. Do you want to link to a reflector? You want to unlink? Do you want to just talk? So that's selected there. So that with the built-in database of repeaters, you're able to get on the air without really any additional programming that's required, and that makes that very easy to do. When operating DSTAR, I mentioned that you do have a built-in database of radios. Now, what comes with the radio is I'll say it's probably a dated list, because whenever that radio was manufactured, it was loaded with a default repeater list. So it may not include all of the DSTAR repeaters in every area, but that can be updated. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well. You also have the function of being able to do the nearest repeater. And you can do the nearest FM or DV, D-Star function as well. Now, I failed to mention early on, most of the, I think all of the D-Star radios, whether it be the ICOMs or Kenwood, will operate both FM mode and D-Star mode. Additionally, on the Kenwood, you get APRS mode, which is nice as well. And as far as D-Star goes, but you can update that repeater list, and that is done actually very easily. And there is a site which I will mention a little later on, point you to, which allows you to update that repeater list. Yes, you can program in a standard way of programming the frequency, offset, direction, et cetera, et cetera. But with this, it makes the programming and the use of that very easy and very flexible. And from the front panel also, you can link to different repeaters or reflectors, and that is user selectable on the radio. So I'm not limited to only being able to link to the repeaters or reflectors that the repeater or repeater owner has allowed me to do, but I can select any of them from the radio, and that is a nice feature of D-Star. And again, I said you have the 1200 baud data in all radios for position reporting, data transmission, or file transfer. Now, to get on the air, it's very easy. If you go to your local radio store and buy a D-Star radio, you can actually power up right then and get on. You can add, all you have to do is add your call sign to the radio, turn on the GPS function, select the nearest repeater, and you're on the air. Now, you may recognize this face with being Tim Allen from the TV show Last Man Standing. Tim has one of the ICOM 51As, and Tim is actually licensed, although he plays a fictitious call sign KA0XTT on the show. Tim is actually a licensed ham and was able to get a radio and get on the air. You may not catch him on very often, but that was fun. I had the opportunity last year to go out for one of the tapings of the show Last Man Standing, and the radio shack that you see in the corner of his office is an actual operating station. And so we operated D-Star that night between the rehearsal and the actual taping of the show with the radios there. And we made about 250 contacts in about an hour and a half with stations all over, actually North America. And it was a great time to do. And we actually got to stay then and see a taping of the show afterwards. So it is easy to get on the air is the point. Now, some people will talk about registering your radio. Let me point out, you do not have to register your call sign. But if you do, it does give you access to some additional features for linking and unlinking to reflectors. And also, if you're using a hotspot, you do have to register to get onto the series of what we call D+ reflectors. So you'll register your call sign, and it was originally started that you registered on, recommended to register on your local repeater, the one nearest you. That worked out pretty well, but some repeater administrators are not real good about very promptly going in and approving call signs. And there is a process also that we want to make sure that that is a valid call sign. What you will want to do now, a national site has been set up, actually an international site, I would say, called registration. And the link to it is shown up above. It's regist.dstargateway, actually .org. That's an error in my slide here. It is regist.dstargateway.org. And it's a process that you will go through to register your call sign. Unfortunately, it's a 3-step process, but everyone has tried to make that as painless as possible. The rule is you only need to register one and only one place, and that can be this Regist site, and you are registered worldwide because that registration database syncs with repeaters worldwide. Now, it is a 3-step process. If you go to regist.gateway.org, you'll get this screen. You'll first act as a new user, and you will put your call sign and email address. And when you do that, then there is a team of administrators who will go in, will verify that your call sign is valid, that it is not registered at any other location, and approve it. I'm one of those system administrators. There's about 5 of us around the world that will do that. And then you will receive an email back to the email address that you gave, instructing you how to add terminals. It's a very detailed, very simple process, but you must complete all 3 steps to be fully registered. And that always generates some questions, but I'll mention a couple of things that usually come up on that. What if I change call signs? Well, you'll just go in and re-register as your new call sign and go through the process again. Now remember, you put your call sign in the radio. That's programmed in the radio one time when you first get it, and that's the call sign that gets transmitted over the air, and that's the call sign that gets validated for any of the work through hotspots, etc. Now you notice one of my bullets here said DMR ID. Now why would you need to do a DMR ID to operate D-Star? Many of the hotspots that are out there now also want a DMR ID. Many of the hotspots, in fact, most of them that are on the market right now, will do multiple modes. They will do D-Star, they'll do System Fusion, they'll do DMR, P25, ENXDN. But you probably will need to go ahead and register for a DMR ID as well, because that's used in the setup of the hotspots. Even though you may not be using DMR or one of the other modes, it's a good idea if you get one of the hotspots to go ahead and do that. Now, updating memories. You can always have a list, the latest list of D-Star radios. There's a site that a good friend of mine has put together, WA4YIH, has put the site on called dstarinfo.com, dstarinfo.com. And although the radio comes preloaded with an international database of repeaters, that list can be dated and may not reflect all the repeaters in a specific area. So using the download feature on dstarinfo.com, it maintains a database, although it may not be 100% perfect because it is user maintained, but it will give you, it's one of the best lists I think you'll find of all of the D-Star repeaters out there. Now, not only does it have a list of D-Star repeaters to be able to update your radio with, you want to be able to update your FM repeaters as well. And dstarinfo.com was able to share data back and forth with repeaterbook.com, which is an excellent source of repeater information. And also they share data with RT Systems that has the programming software for D-Star and many, many other radios. So if you go to dstarinfo.com, go to the downloads tab at the top, you'll enter your location, which is used to determine your location, and we'll get all of the repeaters we can find for an area centered around your location. You'll select the radio down below. It will tell you at that point how many memories you have to fill. You can reserve some empty slots, which I use for being able to add hotspot programming in there as well. And then it will download or create a CSV file, which can then be imported into the radio to replace the repeater list and update it. Now, if you travel a lot, which in recent years, I used to travel quite a bit all over the country. And so I would have different CSV files centered around different areas of the country. For example, I'm in the Southeast, but if I was going out to the West Coast, I would have a repeater file centered around, let's say, Los Angeles, and I would read that in, and I would get the, let's say, 750 closest repeaters centered around that location, and may have another one for Chicago or another one for any other area around. And that would let me quickly get into an area, import that file from the SD card, and then I have a complete new memory list based around that area. So that became very, very convenient as well. I'm not seeing any questions coming up on the chat being relayed to me, but if you have any, feel free to ask along the way, because we're really just kind of skimming the surface to give you an introduction to D-Star.
That's fantastic talk. Yeah, no questions in the chat yet.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk about reflectors. Reflectors are kind of like a conference bridge, and they are used to link repeaters and hotspots together. Now, if you'd like to know where you can get a list of reflectors, many of the D plus repeaters, reflectors as we call them, listed as REF and then a number, are listed on the reflector page of dstarinfo.com. Now, there are different types of reflectors, but all of them are compatible with D-Star. There's the XRF series of reflectors and other groups as well. So you can actually then link through your local repeater or your hotspot to one of these reflectors. And then once you're done there, then you will have all of those repeaters. If you go in on one, you're coming out on all of them. It's truly a linked network. And the audio quality, being a digital voice, is no different than if you're simplex, next door, or across the country or around the world. In Georgia, we were able to, as part of our funding, grant funding, we received a very nice quality server, and we created Reflector 30, REF030. And each reflector has, in a sense, like different modules, and they're like separate conference bridges within the same reflector. So you might have an A, a B, or a C. And what we created is that all of the repeaters in Georgia are on reflector 30 Bravo, 30B. And that created a statewide network. Now, on each individual repeater, you can unlink and link somewhere else. And then after a period of idle time, after someone finishes their QSO with another area, it will relink back to reflector 30 Bravo. So we maintain a statewide network, which has been used. We had some storms going through the state last Sunday evening. And so we were able to take weather reports in from different parts of the state. Two of the most popular reflectors, and if you get on D-Star and want to hear traffic, reflector 1C, reflector 1 Charlie, or reflector 30 Charlie, 30C. Those are, you will find pretty much traffic on there 24 hours a day, because people will be linked to it from worldwide. You may have 150, 200 repeaters at any one time, and that many and more hotspots all connected at one time. So if you're looking for a QSO with someone, reflector 1C or reflector 30C are available. I left off a slide that I should have put in here. You can find who is on and who is connected to a repeater by browsing to the link, let's say ref030c.dstargateway.org. And that will show you a dashboard of who is connected, both repeaters and hotspots, to any reflector. So that usually generates some questions, but if you just put the reflector or even the repeater call sign, if you put the call sign.dstargateway.org, it will show you who is connected and the last heard on a local repeater as well. All right, we mentioned hotspots. What about hotspots? There's some nice little devices that have been created either at the board level, which in the top right, you'll see the DV Mega board, a very nice board that has been created. It can be connected to a Raspberry Pi, to a computer, and that is basically your RF interface. And you see it has an SMA connector on for an antenna. If you put it into a case, it makes a very nice little compact package. Just apply power and either an internet connection by Wi-Fi or an Ethernet port. You'll see also there's an RJ45 on the lower left side of that as well. Does that work with wires or fusion? Yes, most of these hotspots are multi-mode. they support D-Star, DMR, Fusion, NXDN, P25, others. And I have used the one shown here is a what's called a Zoom spot. It mates with, it's a daughter board, the daughter board on top of a Raspberry Pi W, the very small one, and makes for a nice compact package. I have one powered up over to the side over here, and I look over at it, and right now there's a conversation going on P25. So if I pull out my P25 radio, I can actually join that group as well. The many versions of the hotspots are, there's a DV Mega, there's a Zoom Spot, there's a new one that just came out called the Open Spot 3, which offers some transcoding capability built in for linking cross mode. And that's one thing that you'll see as well. You can link across between two digital modes, and that makes it for very interesting work as well, no matter what type of digital radio you may have. Now, for programming on that, you can also use the DR mode in the D-Star radios in there as well. So you'll notice on my the second line, line 30, I program in the hotspot, and now it is available that I can select from my menu in the from mode of that, and then I can use my handheld or mobile radio, which I have here in the house, to connect to different reflectors, different repeaters, etc. So hotspots is something that have really grown. They're not very expensive. They're anywhere from around $100 up to probably $200 or $300 for the different modes on those. But they're a very handy tool for one, if you're traveling, if you're not within range of a D-Star or other digital mode repeater, or if you just want it as a convenient alternative and not tie up your local repeater. So hotspots, very good way to go with any of the digital modes, and was first designed for D-Star and now has been expanded because they have the chipset in there to do the voice coding as necessary. All right, don't see any more questions there. DD mode. We talked about this 128 kilobit mode that's available on 1.2 gigahertz. Originally, ICOM came out with a radio. In fact, it was the first D-Star radio produced fully for D-Star called the ID1, and it operated only on 1.2 gigahertz. It would do FM, it would do regular DV or digital voice mode, but also DD mode, which was the higher speed data. So you can use the DD mode on 1.2 gigahertz to create a 128 kilobit IP-based data stream. So that can be used if you have two radios. Let's say you need to bridge between 2 points. It can actually act as an Ethernet bridge because it is IP-based through that. Or if a repeater is located or is equipped with what's called an RP2D, which is a 1.2 gigahertz data module, then it can actually receive that and transmit and actually send it to the internet or bridge to another radio as well through a repeater. So it becomes a data repeater, truly a data repeater, at a little higher speed than might be normally available. It does have an RJ45 connector on it. Two radios that were produced after the ID1 was the 9100 from ICOM, and most recently the 9700. And those have 1.2 data, and they will do the higher speed DD mode as well. So those are the ones that will actually do that. I'd like to share with you something we did several years ago. We were working with our local emergency management agency here in our county, and we were doing a simulation. We were out. It was interesting. It was a time of extreme drought, but we were out inspecting like stream gauges and dams as if it were a flooding condition that we were out providing data and damage reports on. So we ran into a situation, the lower right picture, where we could not get to one of the bridges to read one of the stream gauges. And we told our local EMA director that we could not get access to the bridge. There was a gate across it with a big stop sign. He said, well, let me look at my aerial data, which was updated every 6 months. He said, I don't see that across there. You must be at the wrong location. So via the D-Star radio, we first sent the location, the GPS location. He said, yes, you're at the right location. And then we actually sent this picture to show that the gate was across there and we could not access it. And he was very impressed that we could actually get real-time data to him, including a picture of what was happening, which was better and more current data than the 6-month updated data that he receives with photographs all across the county. Now, we took that one step further, and let's say, what if we put this in an airplane and took pictures from the air, and that could give us real-time or near real-time damage assessment. So we had a local pilot. We equipped the aircraft with a 1.2 gigahertz antenna, and you see the ID1 radio off to the operator's side. And we were actually taking digital pictures from the air, sending them back. We posted them, and we used the Google Picasa site to post our pictures along with the metadata, which showed the location where they were taken. And so we flew about 75 miles away from our area up to Athens, Georgia, took pictures, and then sent those back via the ID1. Now, remember, it's only 128 kilobit data speed, so you're not going to send extremely high resolution pictures, but we could send a medium resolution picture about every minute to 2 minutes, and provided this series. And then using Google photos from other locations or at similar locations, we could show what was it when the picture was taken as a before, and then what was the real-time look with the photo that was just taken and sent back by the aircraft. So this was kind of interesting, an interesting use of it, and proved very useful for both our local emergency management agency and the state EMA as well. Question, hearing traffic from connector repeaters, but the D-Star repeater replies you are and doesn't seem to be receiving. All right, part of that could be, well, several things actually could be. You will typically see, if you unkey, you may hear just a little burst of noise, and strolling across the bottom of the screen, it may say RPT ? And a lot of people question whether that is correct or is something wrong. What is happening, the repeater is still transmitting your last packets, and that your radio receives that in incomplete mode. And therefore, it says RPT ? Meaning, well, I didn't get quite everything, but I'm letting you know that. Now, if you have RUR, doesn't seem to be receiving. Hearing traffic from connector repeaters. I'm not really, but the D-Star repeater replies UR. Oh, okay. A lot of that may be, I think I see now. When you're actually transmitting, you provide what you want to do is actually in what's called the UR field that's being transmitted. And you may be setting up on your radio to display that. If you're hearing traffic from the repeater, then you're okay, and you can just change the display to show what you receive, not the UR. But if it doesn't seem to be receiving, I'm not sure. It's probably a programming error. I don't know what radio that you have to really choose from on that. Now, the second question is, I just picked up a 7100, and when I connect in DR mode and key up CQ to local repeater, I only ever seem to hear all over and not get replies. Okay, I know the answer to this, and this is a very, very common thing that when someone first gets started. All right, you're in DR mode. If you click or press on the 2 section there, another screen will come up, and you'll have several choices there. CQ means that you are transmitting only to your local repeater, and you're not instructing your repeater to send the packets out the gateway to hotspots or to the reflector. What you will need to do is change that from local repeater to use reflector. It'll either say use reflector or use repeater. And then on your screen, when you select that, it'll come back and say use reflector CQ, 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 or use repeater CQ, CQ, CQ. And what that means at that point, you're not only transmitting on your local repeater, but you're instructing your radio to send them out the gateway so that you can hear, so you can be heard on other repeaters. Sometimes you may be monitoring a reflector and you're only hearing one side of the conversation. And generally that's what happens. One person is on their local repeater, they have it in local CQ, which is CQ, 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 and they're not getting out of their repeater. So you can't hear it because you're listening through another repeater on the reflector. Very common issue. And unfortunately, by default, most radios come up in local CQ mode, and you just need to change that. Congratulations, you're using DR mode, but with that minor change, I think you'll find it'll be much more useful to use. All right, I think I got those series of questions answered. I'm really kind of coming to the end of mine, which looks like I'm right about on time. I will offer these sources for resources to get other information. dstarinfo.com. Not only does it have the repeater and net list, memory downloads, but a lot of good information. You'll also see a section there on DRATS, which I did not talk about. DRATS is a program that connects to the data side of the radio, or can actually use it in telnet mode to do a lot of data functions, file transfer, FTP type functions, chat, email, etc. dstarusers.org. If you're new to DSTAR and you may be building a repeater, there's a lot of good information there. It also has a list of the repeaters as well. Let me see, dstar.info. There's a lot of repeater utilities. If you have a DSTAR repeater, this is a great resource for a lot of information, but it's also a place to find information on call sign registration. All right, I'm coming to the end of my presentation. I haven't seen any other questions. If you have any, we can take this time to try to address those as well.
None in the chat. I guess just I was kind of curious, is the data transmission side, would that work in a keyboard to keyboard type of mode if you put a terminal client on both sides hooked up to serial port?
Yes, it will, because all you'll have to do is, whatever you're doing, it just need to be, to the two IP addresses. You have an IP address on your end, the other one, and so yes, you could use keyboard to keyboard chat.
Oh, very neat. One from, I copied it from the, I can just read it, I guess. Question, does DSTAR support smart beaconing, putting sub-audibles in there without annoying users on the repeater? I imagine that's for a mixed mode operation. If you have a FM receiver, you may not want to be opening the squelch from the digital transmissions.
No, it does it quite different. Number one, it's not doing it in sub-audible mode. It's doing a part of the data stream. However, you don't want to do the beaconing normally, because when it wants to send that GPS position information, it's actually keying the repeater. Now, you don't want to set it for smart beaconing. You want it to beacon only, and it's not really beaconing. You want to send position information only on PTT. So every time you key, then it will send that data as part of the data stream, the position information along with it. So you don't want to enable beaconing, because you'll hear the repeater keying up off and on every time that you try to beacon. DRATS refuses to install a Win64. Is there a workaround? Not sure, because I'm using it on Windows 64 right now, 64-bit. Now, there is, if you'll go to dstarinfo.com and go to the DRATS tab, there's another module that another program, I don't remember the name of it right now, but it's, in fact, let me do this while I'm sharing my screen. Let me bring up a browser. Let me bring up one over here. I can show you real quick. That may be easier to do. Let me bring this over onto my screen and go to dstarinfo.com. And if you go to the DRATS tab here, here is the file. And one of the things about DRATS I'll mention, unfortunately, the original developer of this has lost interest in it, has not done any updates in it for several years. However, there is a gentleman in Italy who is starting to pick up and has updated a lot of the source code and is starting to work on some updates for that. Now, for the original question, this file here called LZHUF, if you're running, like the line says above it, DRATS was originally set for 32-bit. If you're operating Win64, you installed a 64-bit version of this LZHUF_1.exe in this folder. And you'll find that where you have installed DRATS. And that will allow it to work. I think it works much better. Now, if you're having a problem that it isn't installing, I'm not sure what the issue is, because it does install. You only have to change this LZHUF file for that to happen. I hope that answered your question. And you might even check run as administrator to see if your Windows is actually blocking you from trying to install it. Windows loves to do that to you, to overprotect you. Okay, any other questions?
Can you send an SMS text, email using DStar? I guess maybe that's sort of prompted by the APRS presentation from earlier.
Not exactly. You can, there's a way that you can set up DRATS. I'm trying to think of any other way that you could do it. You can set up DRATS to send out an email. And of course, if you know, you can send text to an email address, if you know, depending on the carrier, like something.att.net or something like that. But there's not a way to do it as an SMS text. Now, there is a provision. Let me see. I want to stop sharing just a minute. There is a provision. Let me mute my mic just a second while I cough.
Let's hold on there, John. Patrick, we're going to need your assistance to unmute John again there. The software mute in Zoom, it'll let you, it's a one-way switch. It'll let you put yourself on, but then it won't let you turn yourself off if you're doing a presentation like we're doing. So I can hear you back again, John.
Okay, I think we're back. Thank you. Thanks for the help. There is a short message feature within DStar that you program, and you can program it. You can program it from the front panel, but it's much easier to do with the programming software that allows you to send a short message. It's much shorter than your SMS message on a smartphone, but you can put a message out there. Like, for example, you could put your location, your radio, your name, etc. And if you turn the message feature on, when you transmit, it will transmit first your call sign and then /4 characters that you can put in for a name or something else. And then you can program the message to be, and I don't remember what the length of that is, but it's it may be 20 characters, something like that, that you can transmit along with it. And a lot of people will, and you can store different messages in the radio. So like, for example, if I go to a Hamfest, if I was going to Dayton, I might put en route to Dayton Hamvention and have that transmit while I'm en route. And that would show up on everyone's radio that's receiving me.
That's interesting. Yeah, you mentioned earlier, I think, that you'll see some DStar location information show up on viewers like APRS-Fi. Was that correct?
Yes, and also let me show you this as well. Let me go to one of the, well, let me see, I need to share my screen again. I'm sorry.
Is that is that a different network, or does it actually feed into the APRS-IS network?
It is, let me see, get back here. Okay, do you have my screen again?
Yes, we do.
All right, if I go to one of the repeaters that I mentioned, let's say ref030.dstargateway.org, this is the dashboard. All right, this will show me all the repeaters that are connected. You'll see 30C has a long list, remote users, etc. Now I want to find someone on this list well, I'm not seeing any of them that are transmitting GPS. Let me go to a local repeater, and I can do that by just putting in the call sign. Let me pick one here. Just trying to think of one that I can do for DOC. Well, none are doing it. Normally, if you see someone and their call sign in the last heard is bold orange, you can click on that and it will bring up a Google map and show their location. But that would be someone who is actually transmitting GPS as part of their position and their normal transmission. I wish I
Okay,
could
understood.
find-
So that's published then by the local repeater then.
Right, correct.
So John, just one more thing. You're typing the name of the repeater there, but I just wanted to point out you could get to that from the main repeater stage by just clicking on status beside any of the repeaters.
You
so you don't
can.
have to manually type it, but you're so used to it. It's a quick way to get there, right?
Right.
Your shortcut. Yeah.
Right. I was trying to think of one that might show another large area repeater that might have someone that was transmitting GPS just to show how it is. But basically, it's the same way that if you see them in bold orange down here under last heard and click on them, then it would show on a Google map. It'll bring up a Google map with their location.
Okay, yeah, very good. I just wonder if it's similar, because I have connected into the APRS network and just pulled in massive amounts of packets from it, which you can do as when you said you could view it with the D-Stars. Wonder if there's a centralized network with that similar ability. It sounds like maybe not.
Well, there's a module to really think about how. Let me see the best way to explain this. The gateway of a D-Star repeater is actually a Linux PC. And it is running the gateway software, but you can also, there's a lot of third-party applications that have been built for it. One of them that loads with most D-Star installations actually acts as a gateway, like an iGate, for any traffic coming through it to gate it to the APRS IS network. So that's how that information gets out to the different sites.
Okay, understood. So in I guess in that vein, then the question about sending the SMS text is you might be able to you might have to build it yourself, a connector that's cool that will format messages properly from a D-Star network to get into the APRS PHY get to the SMS gate. Stacking the boxes to get to the cookie jar on top of the fridge.
Right. That's exactly right. Well, I will also add, I'm going to give you one email address if you have questions and want to send it to info@dstarinfo.com. Myself, the admin for that site, and maybe one or two other people are there to try to answer your questions. If we can't answer it, we'll try to at least point you in the right direction so that we can try to get an answer. So info@dstarinfo.com. We'll be glad to help you. Also, I'll mention there's a lot of good videos either on YouTube, the ICOM site. Let me mention this one, dstarinfo.com. If I go back to that, let me bring my screen up again. We're running close to time, I know. If I go back to dstarinfo.com and look at the home page, and then there's also a tab here called conferences. And I did a class at Dayton about 6 years, almost 6 years in a row. I had to skip some. At Dayton, it was a 3-hour class, and we posted the slides, and some of them actually have the video from the conference that you can go back and stream at your convenience and get more D-Star information. But there's a lot of good information under the conferences tab. Presentations that Ed, the admin for this site, and I have done, and others, Robin Cutshaw, who's one of the early developers in D-Star AA4RC. We've done those over the years, and we've posted a lot of those presentations there. But this becomes really a very handy site for a lot of good information, or will push you in toward other information. A lot of things up here in the tab, repeater maps, the downloads, nets, list of reflectors, etc. So it's a great resource for you. I guess that's about all.
That's perfect, John. Thank you very much for a great presentation, and thank you for joining in with us in Canada and helping us do our social distancing and not social isolating.
Very good.
Great.
Hope to chat with some of you on the air.
Perfect. I wanted to mention to everybody that I had set up the invitation to have you muted coming in, and I've turned off. What I mean is I've enabled people to unmute themselves, but it has not taken, and I think it's because the original invite had locked it. So I don't know if Dana, what your suggestion might be if we wanted to open up some talking and so on in the conference, or if we should wrap this up and let it go, and we can kind of do a debriefing and see how well people liked it separately, that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, if we call this the formal end of the sort of our technical conference, then if we just hang around and chat afterwards, that's up to us to do that if we want to. We can. Just anybody that's there, keep in mind you are being streamed live to YouTube and being hurled at least as far as Great Britain. And so as far as the content goes, if that's a concern of yours, be aware of that.
Yeah. Well, I think what we can do is stop the recording and stop the streaming now, and basically, put this to bed, and then based on feedback later, if we have another Zoom session for our local club or for tech conferences or whatever, we can certainly post those and go from there. I think that would be the best way to go then.
Okay, so yeah, why don't you stop the recordings then, Patrick, and then let's open it up and see if we can break